When I proved I was the best recruit in combat, my commander tried to break me. In front of everyone, she said I only needed one eye and ripped out my right eye with her bare hands. While the other cadets were in shock, I stayed calm, staring right back at her, because I knew the Empire wouldn't truly harm a soldier as incredible as me. But to understand how I got here, we need to go back. All this chaos started a long time ago when Earth fell, consumed by endless resource wars and finally wiped out by an unknown alien race. The surviving humans wandered the void of space until they found Novus, our new home, a planet that mirrored the world we lost. But peace is an illusion. Three major powers emerged and carved up this world in a new endless war. The Balado Federation, a melting pot of alien species. The Holy Alliance of the Karates, fanatics wielding magic and mental power. And us, the Akrisha Empire, steel, mechanized discipline, and an unshakable belief in our supremacy. My name is Luca. I was born in the gutters of this empire, a commoner in a machine where nobles dictate who lives and who dies. But I decided I would be different. I turned my body into a weapon, pushing past every limit, every pain, focused on a single dream, joining the Imperial Guard and proving my worth to the Emperor. I was relentless. Everything I did was for the Empire. On the day of my final trial, I let my instincts take over. I copied the insane moves of nobles who had 3 times my training, deflected bullets with my sword, and decimated my enemies in seconds. It was exactly this brutal performance that caught the commander's attention and triggered the eye test I just told you about. As a reward for my sick pain tolerance, I got a military cybernetic eye, the price of power. During my recovery, I was approached by Cadet Number 12, a noble prodigy named L.A. Unlike what I expected, he didn't treat me like trash. He gave me high-quality painkillers, praised my skills, and vented about how the Empire was rotten, valuing noble blood over true talent. A noble wanting to be friends with a commoner, cheering for my success. I replied coldly, saying I would surpass him, but deep down, we formed a bond of mutual respect. 2 years passed. With my new eye guaranteeing perfect and deadly shots, we were deployed on our first real mission. The commander's order was absolute: annihilate an illegal Karate outpost, no prisoners. But when we arrived, the illusion of our sacred cause crumbled to ashes. There was no army. There was no military base. It was a village. In the middle of the chaos, the flames, and the screams, I found my target. A child cornered against a wall, trembling and crying for her mother. The sword felt heavy in my hand. For the first time in my life, the Empire's doctrine failed me. I hesitated. Faking an attack, I told the girl to play dead and spared her, breaking Akrisha's fundamental rule. Before I could question my own betrayal, hell broke loose. Alay, the noble who believed in me, had half his body obliterated by an energy blast. Garita, a Karate Force user, was defending his home with his own blood. I charged at him. I dodged his magic, distorting the space around me, pushing my body beyond exhaustion until I was face to face with him. I drove my sword into his chest, but he didn't fall. With one last effort, Garita used his magic on my head, destroying my helmet. He was 1 second away from crushing my skull, but he looked at me. He saw my young face under the broken armor, and in the heat of the carnage, that relentless enemy hesitated out of compassion. He saw I was just a kid. I didn't have the same mercy. I took advantage of his hesitation and sank my blade even deeper into his heart, securing my victory. But as his blood dripped down my hands and he fell lifeless at my feet, the fanaticism that brought me here vanished. I had won. I had survived. But looking at the body of the man who showed me compassion amidst the rubble of innocent civilians, I finally understood the cruelty of the Empire I was fighting for. As he looked at the chaotic scene before him, hearing screams of despair amidst the destruction. Already in the Akrisha hospital room, Luca floated in the water, staring at the ceiling, while L.A. asked him how it felt to almost kick the bucket. Replying to L.A., who was in the pool beside him, Luca told him to answer that himself, since L.A. was the one who almost died. Feeling smug because he had received new parts, L.A. asked if Luca had gotten anything. Luca replied that he had gotten titanium bones and artificial skin, adding that in a few years he would have a completely new body. Then L.A. said he thought the chief knew about the Force user, explaining that they didn't know because it was a test and that the seniors hadn't helped because they didn't think it was necessary. However, L.A. found it strange that he and Luca, the other cadet hit by the Force's power, had survived. It didn't seem like a coincidence. Perhaps the Force user had no intention of killing them from the start, a thought that left Luca pensive. Remembering what Garita had said to him, Luca believed it was the enemy's mistake to let him live, since he was a soldier of the Empire. That pathetic mercy was the reason why the Caritas kept being wiped out. Luca thought angrily. Suddenly, LA turned and asked Luca why he had turned a blind eye to that carried a child, catching Luca off guard. Still looking at Luca, LA pressed, "Can you answer why?" Hearing that, Luca turned to face the opposite side, telling LA he talked too much and asking if he had grown a new tongue. With a guilty and regretful expression, Luca replied that it had been a mistake and that it would never happen again. An instructor announced that the trainees had now completed 2 of their 4 years of Imperial Guard training and that they should serve as models for the younger recruits, especially Luca and LA, as the top 1 and 2 of the troop. The man in glasses also stated that Luca and LA could become centurions of the Empire in the future, bringing it great glory. He explained that within the Imperial Guard, every 1,000 guards are divided into 10 centuries, each commanded by a single chief centurion. As the man in glasses departed, Luca mused that after the cadets complete body mechanization, they would likely be assigned to the 10th century. Even though it was known as the lowest ranked century, Luca believed that securing a spot there would be highly beneficial for him. Meanwhile, in a training arena, 2 soldiers sparred. LA prepared to launch a direct punch with his mechanized arm. However, Luca, his opponent, swiftly used his guard to block the blow. Exchanging strikes, the two continued their intense training for a while. Noticing LA's improvement, Luca acknowledged that the noble had indeed grown stronger with his new arm. But then, Luca unbalanced L with a swift kick to his supporting leg, sending him tumbling forward. Seizing the advantage, Luca prepared to deliver a direct blow to LA's face. He stopped the strike just before impact, then declared to LA, "This round marks 124 rounds and 124 victories." After the training session, the two sat together, gazing at the stars. LA admitted, "I really thought I would win this time." Luca replied, "Getting a few new parts isn't everything." Ile, the blonde, then observed, "You seem stiffer after that speech about becoming a centurion." Confirming this, Luca said he wished he had more experience as an Imperial Guard. Ile asked, "Why don't you relax a little?" Looking at his companion, Luca answered, "Unlike you, LA, I have no place to return to. That's why I must always surpass myself." He added, "You have talent, my friend, but you lack motivation. Why did you truly want to become a guardian?" LA smiled, looking at the sky, and confessed, "I actually wanted to be an archaeologist, to study the ancient arcane civilization." Luca asked him, "Why don't you do that then?" Ella replied that the subject was banned by the Empire, and he felt his family wouldn't accept such a path. Luca called his companion spoiled for being upset about that, pointing out that the poor didn't even know if they would manage to eat. Ely already knew Luca would say that, and explained he was just sharing a secret with his friend, but Luca gave him a stern warning. "That could sound like criticism of the Empire, and you'd be in serious trouble if someone reported you," Ela retorted. "You also keep one of my secrets," Luca replied. "I only hesitated because my opponent wasn't a true combatant." Staring intently at LA, Luca declared, "I am loyal to the Empire for recognizing its strength, and the Empire's enemies are my enemies as well." He then warned, "You, cadet, are no exception to that." LA smiled upon hearing those words. As Ile climbed down from the wall, he called Luca a liar. Looking at Luca, Ile said, "If your devotion to the Empire were truly fanatical, you would have already tried to kill me." Walking away, Ile told his friend, "Don't be so hard on yourself." With an annoyed expression, Luca called LA an idiot, muttering, "If he keeps that up, he's going to get himself screwed." A year later, in an uninhabited neutral arcane zone, the soldiers were on a reconnaissance mission. Ile, with his hand on a wall, excitedly exclaimed, "This is a mystical place. The wall is emitting energy, and it's millions of years old." Smiling with sparkling eyes, Ile looked back at Luca and asked, "Isn't this cool? Civilizations existed that explored the stars before humans even existed." Worried, Luca thought that even after his warning, LA hadn't hesitated to cross the line. Remembering their mission, Luca told LA, "Be more careful. We'll have to fight if we encounter an enemy." However, LA, too excited to listen, replied, "Some Imperial Guard will come to save us." This made Luca uneasy. Suddenly, someone approached them, saying, "The present exists because of the past, and ancient records could allow us to foresee the future. That's why it makes sense to be interested in history." It was Claude Ramon, another noble cadet. With white hair and red eyes, Claude said, "I like you, Luca. Are you dating someone?" Taking a combat stance, Luca replied, "I would consider you a threat if you came any closer." Claude asked him to calm down, explaining, "I only wanted to introduce you to my sister, since you will probably become her superior." Claude then asked Luca to consider the idea. LA laughed, remarking on Luca's popularity, to which Luca sharply told him to shut up. Suddenly, the group felt a tremor. The leader, quickly ordering a combat formation, declared that he and Claude would take the front, while LA's group provided support. Noticing a bright light among the trees, Luca tried to discern its source. A shadowy figure stood motionless, a glowing cube hovering above its head. Luca's eyes widened in terror as he recognized the ominous shadow. It was a quarry paladin, clad in elegant silver armor. Sensing their presence, the paladin turned toward them. Luca and Claude, the two trainees, panicked, realizing their cover was blown. Raising an arm, the paladin conjured a sharp spear wreathed in crackling energy, pointing it directly at the soldiers. Witnessing such raw power, Luca desperately yelled for Claude to run. But the knight was too fast, hurling his attack toward them at incredible speed. Unable to react, Luca watched in horror as Claude took the enemy's strike head-on. Thrown backward, Claude's body erupted in a crimson spray. Terrified by the sudden, brutal attack, Luca screamed his friend's name. Meanwhile, the paladin remained motionless after the attack. The spear, thrown by the knight, struck the wall of an ancient pillar. With a mere extension of his hand, the paladin once again enveloped the spear in his power, recalling it directly back into his grasp. Still frozen in place, Luca stared at Claude's trembling body on the ground. A wave of horror washed over him as he remembered their earlier conversation, now seeing what little remained of his companion. The spear had moved with such blinding speed that half of Claude's body was already gone. Luca frantically tried to activate his mechanical eye, but it wouldn't respond. Staring at the paladin, whose hand remained extended, Luca silently begged for his eye to work, to calculate the spear's trajectory. Just then, a volley of gunfire erupted, directed at the knight, who swiftly conjured a shield to defend himself. It was Ile and his team, advancing rapidly toward Luca and shouting for him to regroup. Still aiming their weapons at the paladin, Ile, the blonde leader, declared it was time to fight and buy time, urging Luca not to stand still. Luca knew Ile was right. Escape was impossible. There was only one course of action. Unsheathing his red sword, Luca prepared to fight. He recalled the Imperial Guard's senior officers, knowing he only needed to buy time until reinforcements arrived. Luca and the paladin stared each other down, and the desperate race against time began. The paladin hurled his spear again toward Luca, who managed a partial dodge. The spear grazed him, tearing away half of his helmet. The knight swiftly manipulated the force, causing the spear to change trajectory and loop back toward Luca from behind. Seeing the spear rapidly approaching, Luca realized he wouldn't have time to dodge. A memory flashed through his mind, the near-death sensation, and Commander Castoria's voice declaring the Imperial Guard had no need for weaklings. Galvanized, Luca repositioned himself, drawing his sword to defend. He managed to make his blade collide with the spear, thinking he needed to attack before the paladin could make another move. With the impact, the force surrounding the spear shattered. An explosion then erupted, kicking up a cloud of dust. Ile, worried, shouted Luca's name. A piece of Luca's sword was flung far away, spinning before embedding itself in the ground. Still standing after the blast, Luca found himself disarmed, his hand destroyed from blocking the spear's attack. Facing the paladin who stood before him, Luca braced himself for the next strike. This time, the knight gripped the hilt of his own sword, a blue aura emanating from his body. In a swift, deadly motion, he swung his blade, unleashing 3 slashes that formed a lethal triangle, hurtling toward the trainees. Luca barely dodged, but his right arm was cut. The blow, however, continued, striking the other soldiers behind Luca and cutting them all down. Realizing the paladin hadn't been aiming at him, the cadet looked back and shouted to his friend, who had been struck. Taking advantage of Luca's opening, the paladin advanced rapidly toward him. Terrified and unwilling to meet his end there, Luca saw no way out. Not knowing what to do, in a moment of desperation, he shouted and leaped toward the paladin, who prepared to strike again. Meanwhile, in the forest, someone was approaching, using propulsion to increase his speed. Advancing faster than before, the red-cloaked guard headed deeper into the forest. As he drew closer, he saw Luca, disarmed and missing an arm, with the paladin moving toward him. Just as they were about to collide, Luca saw the paladin's head grabbed right in front of him. Startled as he hadn't seen the guard arrive, Luca looked, trying to understand what had happened. Realizing then that the Imperial Guard had finally arrived to save them, the guard slammed the paladin to the ground, still gripping his head. Increasing the propulsion of his leg, the guard scraped and dragged the paladin's head along the ground. While doing this with one hand, he drew his pistol with the other, aimed at the knight's back, and fired multiple shots, all while continuing to drag his head across the ground. Seeing the ancestral pillar, the Imperial Guard turned and hurled the paladin toward it, causing an explosion on impact. From a distance, Luca saw the pillar vibrate from the force of the blow, breathing heavily and still unable to believe he had survived. Amid all the dust and smoke, the guard approached him. When the guard got closer and emerged from the smoke, Luca finally confirmed it was a senior. Shouting loudly, Luca became euphoric, finally safe with the Imperial guard there. However, behind the guard, the paladin braced his sword on the ground, trying to stand again. Looking back, the senior, exuding a red aura, stared at the knight, who glared back through his cracked mask. Now facing the paladin, the guard prepared for a new battle. The knight, meanwhile, leaned on his sword, trying to stand and fight again. Grabbing his axe, the senior pointed it toward the paladin. Watching from a distance, Luca, panting, thought about the battle. An Imperial guard with a legion against a holy knight wielding the force. Meanwhile, as the two prepared to strike at each other, Luca wondered which side was stronger. Their weapons clashed, causing a blinding flash and a massive shockwave. They locked eyes, engaging in a raw contest of strength. The cloudy sky loomed as the two opponents traded blows while fighting in midair. In the middle of the forest, a massive explosion caused by their clash could be seen from afar. In an unrelenting exchange of strikes, neither gave the other any room to breathe. Watching this, Luca thought that this was what it looked like when a senior fought. So fast you couldn't even track the path of his weapon. As the two kept fighting, Luca prayed for the guard to win. Landing a powerful blow, the guard used his weapon's propulsion to amplify his strike, shattering the paladin's weapon into pieces. Seizing the opportunity, the senior grabbed the knight by the head again, activating the propulsion of his mechanized arm and creating immense pressure against the opponent's skull. However, while the guard gripped his helmet, the paladin used the force on his finger to coat the spear. The spear, which had been lodged in the ground behind Luca, became enveloped in the force again. Realizing this, Luca looked at the spear with a fearful expression. Remembering Claude, Luca thought the senior had no idea of the weapon's speed and power and wouldn't be able to react in time. Missing an arm and desperate, Luca knew that if the guard lost, it would also be his own end. Shifting his foot, Luca searched for a way to prevent it. When the spear shot out of the ground toward the senior, Luca threw his leg in front of it, which was torn clean off. Praying for it to miss its mark, all that was left was to wait. Still holding the paladin's head, the guard noticed the spear coming his way, grazing past him. With the spear now having missed its target, the paladin grabbed the guard's axe, channeling immense force into his hand. Seeing the paladin's intent, the guard released his weapon and clenched his fist, preparing to punch his enemy. As the paladin intensified the force in his hand, the guard hurled his fist with full power, landing a crushing punch to the paladin's head. The impact slammed the paladin into the ground, causing a massive explosion. Amid the debris of the blast, Luca lay panting, missing his right arm and leg. Too weak to move closer and see the outcome, Luca wondered who had won. Sensing someone approaching, he prayed it was the Imperial guard. Still with his eyes closed, Luca heard the person beside him say he had done a good job. The voice said they had managed to get rid of the paladin thanks to Luca, then asked if Luca had any wounds on his abdomen. Luca replied that he had been wounded while trying to dodge the paladin's forced slash. The guard then offered to help him back to base. Looking at the guard, Luca was both shocked and disturbed. This was Legion, a full-body mechanical armor designed to remove all unnecessary parts for combat, transforming its wearer into the ultimate weapon. It was every trainee's dream to receive one. As the guard extended his hand, Luca noticed he had no head. Luca then wondered if the guard was alive but without a brain, questioning whether he was a machine or a human. With an eerie voice, the guard, who hadn't realized it yet, tried to find his head, wondering if it was truly gone. Upon realizing his head was missing, the guard let out a desperate scream, then fell to his knees, showing no sign of life. Seeing this, Luca wondered if he had been trying to become such a monster all along. Looking at his own body, Luca noticed he was trembling and cold, wondering if he would survive until help arrived. Lying on the ground with the lifeless guard's armor beside him, Luca wondered if this was the last thing he would ever see. However, someone approached and asked Luca if he was okay. It was Lei, who had also survived the paladin's attacks and had come to find his friend. Luca asked his companion Lei about the others. Lei replied that everyone else was dead except for the two of them. Sitting next to the fallen guard, Lei, the blonde, asked Luca how bad his injuries were. Luca replied that he would meet his end soon. Still lying down, Luca asked Lei what he planned to do now, surprising his friend with the question. Luca also said that the life he always wanted was right in front of his eyes, while Lei just listened and said nothing. Looking toward the horizon, Luca told Lei that what he desired could not be achieved within the Empire. Sweating cold, Luca said that if that was truly Lei's wish, he should go to Karate or Balado to fulfill his dream. Still without answering, Lei Lei heard Luca add that as soon as reinforcements arrived, they would have to return to the Empire, so Lei should hurry. After a short while, Lei stood up, panting and losing his strength. Luca looked at Lei, who was walking toward the forest. He thought any citizen of the Empire would envy Lei for having a family like his. Remembering that night they had watched the stars, Luca thought he couldn't understand Lei. However, when Lei spoke about his dreams, that was when his eyes shone the brightest. So, from the bottom of his heart, Luca hoped Lei could live the way he wanted, then closed his eyes. Suddenly, Luca felt someone pressing a cloth against his severed arm. When Luca opened his eyes, he saw it was Lei and asked what that idiot was doing. Smiling, Lei said that seeing the way Luca was acting had made him worry whether Luca would actually die there. He added that he couldn't live with a clear conscience if Luca lost his life that way. Luca sighed, thinking Lei was an idiot, as he saw the rescue craft approaching them. Sometime later, Luca was sitting, focused on reading a comic book about the invasion of a starship. Then, Lei arrived by surprise, asking if Luca was looking for new parts, which startled him. Pointing at the magazine, Lei recommended the F-24 model, explaining that it adapted quickly and was much better than what Luca currently had. Luca closed the magazine, placing it on the seat. He looked at his friend and told him to stop scaring him like that. Lei immediately apologized. After returning to the Empire and receiving treatment, Luca was investigated by various departments. They questioned him about the incident where 3 cadets and a guard lost their lives, an event they dubbed the encounter with the paladin, but that was merely Luca's assumption. In truth, Luca had been called in for other reasons. Lei mentioned that an artifact had been found at the scene. Remembering the incident, Luca recalled the floating cube near the paladin and suspected it was the cause of everything. Looking at Lei, Luca asked who would collect the artifact. His friend replied that he'd heard they sent a team of specialists. Then, with a tense expression, Lei explained that if the Alliance refused to hand over the artifact and the site, a great war would break out. If the Empire fought against the Caritas, Balada would benefit without lifting a finger. That was why several smaller, less damaging battles were already taking place. But Luca cut him off, saying he didn't want to hear about politics. He just wanted to take orders and fight. That was what a member of the Imperial Guard should do. Luca remembered reporting about the senior who lost his head and how the captain had dismissed it as a phantom phenomenon due to residual traces. He wondered if that was truly the case, but the captain's reaction to his words suggested otherwise. Pensive, Luca knew many of his questions remained unanswered. However, he wasn't foolish enough to go digging for information, especially since headquarters refused to respond. Within the cadet training facilities, there was an extravagant place that didn't match the overall atmosphere. This was the visiting room, created so soldiers could meet with family and friends. Luca, however, had never expected to use it. Coming from a poor orphanage, he never imagined anyone would seek him out there, he thought, as he looked at a white-haired girl standing before him. The girl was Lillian Ramones, Claude's sister. Luca wondered why she had come to see him. Remembering the incident, Luca assumed she must be there to question him about her brother's death, as he had been the team leader. Lillian asked him not to worry, explaining that her family had already expected it ever since Claude became a member of the Empire. Sipping her coffee, Lillian said she was there to see him. She went on to explain that Claude had spoken about him often, referring to him as a talented friend among the other cadets. Her brother had wanted them to meet. Luca asked Lillian if she knew about his origins, and she replied that she preferred it that way. Since formalities and bureaucracy in this case were minimal, Luca noted that she seemed to genuinely want to get to know him. Lillian then asked if he didn't like the idea of getting to know each other better. Luca, in turn, asked her, "Why specifically me?" Lillian asked if her brother's request wasn't reason enough, adding that she believed it would be advantageous for him. Thoughtful, Luca agreed with that fact. Someone like him marrying a noblewoman like her would indeed be a miracle. He thought about how he had done everything to be successful in life. If marrying a noble would bring him closer to his goal, he would do it. However, it all seemed far too easy, making Luca hesitant and suspicious. Responding to Lillian, Luca refused the offer, leaving her surprised. As he stood and turned to leave, Luca bid farewell to the white-haired girl. He thought about how he had always considered Ely stupid for trying to escape the Empire. He never imagined he would make a decision based on a mere feeling. Luca was certain that Lillian, being a noble, would see that as an insult. He hoped this wouldn't make things worse. Suddenly, Lillian approached Luca, holding his hand and catching him off guard. Blushing and still holding his hand, Lillian said she must have rushed things. She asked that they start by becoming friends instead. Still surprised, Luca looked at Lillian and replied that wasn't what he meant. Lillian, having already let go of Luca's hand, ran off in the opposite direction, saying she would be back soon to see him again. Staring at his hand, Luca grew pensive. He thought it would be hard to get rid of Lillian. Sometime later, in the Empire's physical training hall, Luca and a man with a ponytail faced each other. The man was Quinuan, the Imperial Guard's combat instructor. He laughed, saying he hadn't expected the cadet to come to him. Luca replies that he wants to learn from him, but Quinuan states there is nothing more he can teach due to Luca's talent, adding that he knows few cadets stronger than him. Luca responds that he is not satisfied with merely being the best among cadets. Quinuan, however, warns Luca not to be so hasty. Quinuan was unlike other instructors, strong, yet he relied on what Luca perceived as cheap devices. Though Luca's own mechanical parts were superior, he lacked Quinuan's unique legion of skills. Clenching his fist, Luca felt grateful for the opportunity. He knew that if he could not defeat Quinuan, he stood no chance against a paladin. Sighing, Quinuan declared Luca had left him no choice, then motioned for the cadet to attack. Luca quickly advanced toward Quinuan, preparing to throw a punch. With seemingly little effort, Quinuan redirected Luca's punch, asking if he intended to test his new mechanical parts. As Luca prepared another strike, he thought, even though he's a retired guard, Quinuan won't even feel this hit. Luca then unleashed a flurry of blows on Quinuan, giving him no room to breathe. Moving in, Luca decided to leap toward his opponent to close the distance, intending to finish everything with a single strike. He extended his arm toward Quinuan. Quinuan, his own arm extended, simply watched Luca, still taking no action. Grabbing Quinuan's sleeve, Luca pulled his arm downward, clearing the path. He prepared another powerful blow, already claiming victory in his mind. Still expressionless, Quinuan simply watched the attack coming his way. Just as the blow was about to land, Quinuan activated his mechanical eye. Suddenly, Luca found himself upside down in the air above his opponent, as if he had been violently thrown. Completely shocked and not understanding a thing, Luca wondered why he was in the air. He quickly placed his hand on the ground to recover his stance. Luca thought, that won't stop me, and launched an upside-down kick toward Quinuan's face. Still on guard, Quinuan swiftly grabbed Luca's foot and ankle mid-kick. Then, in a split second, Luca was thrown again, sent flying far away. He bounced several times on the ground before finally coming to a stop. Looking fearfully toward Quinuan, Luca wondered what on earth had just happened. Approaching Luca, Quinuan stated that besides failing to gauge his opponent's strength, Luca had also gotten distracted during the fight. Looking down at Luca, who was still lying there bewildered, Quinuan asked, "Why are you in such a rush?" Luca realized that from his point of view, his first attack should have landed squarely on Quinuan's chin. However, the moment Quinuan touched his arm during the attack, Luca's body had been stunned. It was as if he had lost control. The kinetic energy of his own strike had been redirected back into him. Luca then asked Quinuan what that move was. Quinuan replied that it was his personal defense technique. Quickly rising from the floor, Luca eagerly asked Quinuan if he could learn that technique. With a trembling hand, Quinuan looked at Luca and asked if he truly wanted to learn it after ending up in such a state. Quinuan also added that cutting corners always comes with a price to pay, as a trickle of blood dripped from his hand onto the floor. Once again, the two were seen in the arena, now facing each other while sitting. Quinuan then asked Luca what he had learned from the battle. Luca replied that he had been lured in and lost control of his body. Quinuan explained that this was the RC's combat method. Luca then asked if that method was not typically used by bandits. Luca suggested it should be implemented into military standards, but Quinuan replied that the method had 3 problems. Luca asked if one problem was its difficulty to learn. Quinuan agreed, praising Luca, and then mentioned a problem related to the brain. Again, Quinuan agreed, but stated that Luca could not know the last problem just yet. Luca declared that in the future, he would try to learn it. As Quinuan stood up, he told Luca it was not his decision to make, then asked if Luca knew how much money had been invested in him. Luca also stood up, attempting to answer, but Quinuan interrupted him. The instructor then told Luca to respond, explaining that training that technique inevitably caused brain damage, and asked if Luca could then swear never to use it. Looking at Quinuan's back, Luca knew that if he lied, Quinuan would know. Luca admitted he couldn't swear it, but promised to try his best not to use the technique. This made Quinuan smile. The instructor turned, still smiling, and placed a hand on Luca's shoulder. He told Luca he liked his honesty, which surprised the soldier. Suddenly, the instructor swept Luca's legs. Before Luca could react, he was on the ground. Walking to the other corner of the ring, Quinuan told Luca to always anticipate attacks from now on. Only then, he explained, would Luca be ready for any situation. Luca, looking at Quinuan, started to ask, "Does that mean—" Quinuan stared back, cutting him off. "Get up quickly," he commanded. "I like those who learn fast." After a while, LA, concerned, asked Luca if he was sleeping well. Luca's friend looked at him with a tired face and huge dark circles under his eyes. As the two walked down a corridor, Luca replied to LA that he had just been busy. He thought to himself that it had been a month since his training with Quinuan began, but Quinuan hadn't taught him anything directly. Instead, the instructor had told him to observe and learn on his own, explaining that arcane combat was different and utilized the user's abilities to their maximum potential. It was a superior form of combat, using every weapon in one's arsenal to create the most efficient method within seconds. It was, essentially, a way of using the mind. Meanwhile, Luca asked how LA's mission went. LA replied that it had been nothing special. Still walking, LA mentioned that recent missions had been easy. Luca suggested the Alliance must be being careful. Luca then asked LA if that wasn't the reason the commander wasn't around. LA replied that he had heard from his family about it. Luca then asked if it would take at least a rebellion for the commander to be deployed. LA confirmed it. Luca looked alarmed. LA, however, said he didn't know many details, only that a group had planned a rebellion. Irritated, Luca called the group stupid for attempting a civil war in the middle of a conflict against the Alliance. LA then warned that if they made the foolish mistake of ignoring such problems, they would end up rotting from the inside. Hearing that, Luca pinned LA against the wall and prepared to punch him in the face. In a threatening tone, Luca told LA he would overlook his wish to leave the Empire, but not his becoming an enemy. Scared and breathless, LA said he had also passed the guard's attitude test, but believed it was important for the Empire to know about this. He pleaded with Luca to calm down. Releasing LA, Luca told him not to say suspicious things, as he didn't want to see LA's name on the rebel list. Smiling, LA asked Luca to relax and, as a gift, offered to pay for his meal over the weekend. But without looking at LA, Luca said he already had plans and told his friend not to talk to him because it was irritating. Still in the hallway, LA asked Luca if his plans were with a girl, but Luca simply told him to leave. Sometime later, in the lower sector of Akricha, Luca and Quinuan both expressed feeling nostalgic about being there again. Luca said that ever since becoming a soldier, he had never thought of returning to that slum. As Quinuan looked at Luca excitedly, passing by two men fighting, Luca hadn't imagined that the instructor would bring him to this place. All the thermal waste and heat were released into the lower sector. When Luca was younger, he had breathed that air all the time, feeling that if he didn't get out of that place, he would be a loser for the rest of his life. Called by Quinuan, the distracted Luca shifted his attention back to the instructor, who was standing in an alley. After passing through the alley, they found themselves in a somewhat busy place. Looking at the shop windows, Luca asked if this was a black market, mentioning that some curious kids never came back from here. As Quinuan asked if it was Luca's first time there, Luca realized the instructor knew this place better than he did. Looking at his hand, Luca remembered that Quinuan had told him to use low-quality arms and legs, and he wondered why. In front of Luca, Quinuan told him to get ready. At the end of the hallway, two guards stood in front of a door. When Luca and Quinuan approached, one of the guards told them to stop. Quinuan replied that he wanted to speak with the supervisor. Hearing that, the guard asked if Quinuan knew Aleph, the boss of the place. Quinuan said no, he just wanted to see him. The guard then drew his pistol and pointed it at Quinuan's head, asking if he was crazy. Quinuan simply smiled at the situation. Meanwhile, Luca quickly moved in and took the guard down. Still falling, the guard, not understanding what had just happened, looked up and realized it was the boy. As they finally hit the ground, the other guard turned toward them. However, Luca had already disarmed the guard on the ground and was pointing a gun at him, telling him not to move. With a smile, Quinuan asked the nervous guard if he understood the situation now, then told him to bring Aleph quickly. The two guards then threw their weapons to the floor. Looking at Quinuan, Luca asked what he would have done if Luca hadn't been fast enough. Quinuan replied that he would have found another way. Meanwhile, Luca looked around and asked what this place was. Smiling, Quinuan answered, saying this was the hottest spot in the Empire, which left Luca confused. Seeing Luca's confusion, Quinuan, still smiling, told him this was the Coliseum. Inside, two guards stood in front of a closed room. Inside the room, Luca and Quinuan sat across from three other men. A fat man in a suit sat in front, while the others stood behind him like bodyguards. Facing the fat man, Quinuan pointed at Luca and asked him to put the boy in the match. Quinuan added that it was fine if Luca died fighting, and Luca then understood why he needed low-grade equipment. While listening, the fat man took a drag from his cigarette. Unexpectedly, the fat man flicked the still-lit cigarette toward Quinuan. Quickly, Luca caught the cigarette that would have hit Quinuan's chest, while Quinuan stood still without reacting. Meanwhile, they noticed the two guards were pointing their guns at them. The fat man then said they misunderstood, claiming he only called them here because it it would be easier to get rid of them. Analyzing the situation, Luca knew this was a bluff. If the fat man hadn't wanted to hear them out, he could have gotten rid of them long ago. And now, 3 guns were pointed at them, not counting the 2 guards outside. Thinking about what he needed to do first, Luca kicked. He flipped the table toward the fat man, using it as a shield, startling and surprising the fat man and his bodyguards. As the table shattered, Luca charged toward his enemies. Luca then put the fat man in a chokehold, disarming him. With the fat man's gun, Luca aimed at his bodyguards, quickly landing a shot to the head of each one, taking them down. Hearing the shots, the guards outside stormed into the room to see what had happened. But Luca was already on them with his gun aimed, sending those 2 to a better place as well. However, this was all a simulation created by Luca's mechanical eye. Quinuan then asked about the former owner of the place. The fat man then asked if Quinuan knew Tora, explaining that Tora was caught rigging matches and after that he was done for. Quinuan said it was a good deal since the fat man took down Tora and took over the coliseum. This was normal as Tora had done the same thing. Getting closer to Quinuan, Aleph pointed his gun at Quinuan's head, asking how he knew so much. But this time, with a serious look, Quinuan told Aleph to calm down unless he wanted to visit Tora in the afterlife. Hearing that, Aleph became startled and afraid. Then, telling his guards to lower their weapons, Aleph sat back down. Awkwardly adjusting his glasses, Aleph asked if all Quinuan wanted was for Luca to join the match. Analyzing Luca, Aleph said Luca's body wasn't built for combat, and that he would be destroyed quickly. Aleph then agreed to put Luca in the match, but wanted something in return. So Quinuan offered Tora's safe, saying that he knew its location, and that Aleph had Tora's eye. Aleph, now worried, wondered who Quinuan was, and why he knew so much. Smiling, Quinuan said he was merely a spirit from the past, and that Aleph didn't need to worry. Aleph offered Quinuan VIP treatment, which Quinuan accepted, then requested that they put Luca against their best fighter. Looking at Quinuan, Luca realized he still had much to learn from the instructor, someone who could take control of any situation without moving a muscle. Already in the Coliseum's waiting room, Quinuan stared at a tablet. He reminded Luca that the fight was in 2 hours, and Luca asked him what was inside the vault. Quinuan replied that the contents could change Aleph's life, adding that he would explain more to Luca after his victory. Showing Luca the tablet, Quinuan revealed his opponent was Gabriel, the Iron Fist. Quinuan warned that Coliseum fighters didn't care about the future and would use anything to win, reminding Luca that he might not be able to take even one direct hit. Looking at Luca, Quinuan told him to pay attention, as he was about to explain the foundation of the RC's combat method. Relaxing his hand, Quinuan told Luca to be satisfied with what he had. Hearing that, Luca said he had learned that satisfaction meant losing, but Quinuan replied, "Water doesn't break, it changes shape." Quinuan then said he had been watching Luca since his first exam, and with Luca's potential, seeking him out had been the right thing to do. Luca said Quinuan was just buttering him up. Quinuan placed a hand on Luca's shoulder and agreed. Smiling, Quinuan said this could be the last time he would see Luca. Luca returned the smile as lights illuminated the main arena. As Luca walked toward the arena, the announcer introduced him as bold for challenging Gabriel in his very first fight. He mocked Luca, saying the boy was still drinking from a baby bottle and calling him "good boy," a nickname Luca found awful. As Luca passed through the crowd, he heard many boos and people asking who had let him in there. Looking around, Luca saw several spectators excited to see him get destroyed. Ignoring all that, Luca kept walking toward the arena, contemplating humanity's dark desires. Stepping into the arena, Luca knew they truly wanted to see him destroyed. That was actually a good thing, because he finally felt like he was back home. Pulling down his hood, Luca decided to show those losers what he was capable of. Remembering his childhood, Luca recalled he had never felt full when he was younger. Twice a month, an Imperial officer would send supplies to the orphanage, but the owner always sold more than half. For the children in the orphanage, hunger was normal, but even hungry, Luca never stopped training. He always read every book, even the old and dusty ones, and trained his body using weights made of stone. While doing that, the other children would ask if he was stupid, claiming it would only make him hungrier. Staring at the other children, Luca declared that if he was hungry, he could get more food by using his strength. The strong destroy the weak. Luca understood that rule well. It was normal for the strong to be full and the weak to be hungry. While the other children cried after getting beaten, they would tell Luca he was a poor child just like them and shouldn't act that way. At the end of the day, Luca was just another member of the lower levels. Still eating and ignoring what the children said, Luca thought he didn't need to listen to the crying of the weak. At 12, Luca's name was placed on the list of potential Imperial Guard trainees, and at 15, he officially became one. Thinking that those children had no idea what his life was like, Luca hoped never to see those losers again. For most of his time as a trainee, Luca had forgotten that place and thought he would never set foot there again. Standing in front of his opponent, Luca heard the crowd chanting Gabriel's name. With a smile, Gabriel said that for them to put a kid as his enemy, Aleph must have used something really good, but being paid was what mattered. As Luca analyzed Gabriel, he noticed that Gabriel's body was completely asymmetrical and unbalanced. Gabriel's parts came from different factories, and the skin in contact with his armor suffered from constant inflammation. Still, Gabriel was powerful. His body had been modified solely to become stronger, Luca thought as he stared at him. Standing close to Luca, Gabriel said Luca wasn't bad looking, and asked why he didn't serve him that night. Smiling, the cadet retorted that Gabriel would indeed need a servant, because he would be utterly destroyed that night. Hearing that, Gabriel became extremely irritated. As he headed to his side of the ring, the Iron Fist declared he would beat Luca so badly that Luca would beg to be his servant. A man with a microphone in hand started the show, announcing that the world of Destroy or Be Destroyed was about to begin. Meanwhile, Quinuan watched from the stands. With everyone's attention fixed on the arena, Aleph announced that the massacre was about to start. Luca, his fist clenched, knew that judging by Gabriel's modified body, he couldn't take even a single hit, or it would cost him his life. Just then, Gabriel charged toward him, preparing to punch. However, Luca dodged the attack, causing Gabriel's fist to smash straight into the ground. Once again, the Iron Fist tried to land a punch, and once again, he missed. Seizing the opportunity, Luca landed a clean kick right to Gabriel's head. Gabriel laughed, looking at Luca, and asked if that kick was supposed to tickle. Luca, excited, thought that if he had his real armor, Gabriel would have exploded from that kick, as he backed off to put some distance between them. Looking back, Luca realized he couldn't keep running. The arena was too small. Gabriel attacked Luca several times. Luca dodged them all, knowing each strike was lethal, yet his own attacks caused no damage. Luca also knew the audience wasn't rooting for him, but against him, with everyone shouting for him to be destroyed quickly. Recognizing his disadvantage, Luca wondered what Quinuan wanted him to learn here. Then Luca remembered the instructor's words. No matter how little he had, he must fight with it, without complaining. Looking at Gabriel, Luca recalled that the teacher had taken his good armor, but not his eyes. That meant Quinuan expected him to win not only through brute force, Luca thought, as Gabriel attacked again. Arce's combat consists of using everything at your disposal to its maximum potential, Luca thought, activating his mechanical eye. Analyzing the situation, Luca saw that Gabriel's fists were like cannons, triggered by a mechanism in his shoulder. However, they were slow compared to a real weapon, and their trajectory was obvious, even as he watched the strike coming his way. Realizing what was happening, Quinuan was surprised. A smile appeared on his face as he said Luca was a genius. Remembering Luca's exam, Quinuan said Luca had already experienced Arce's combat before through his own talent. Quinuan urged Luca to show his potential. Meanwhile, Luca dodged all of Gabriel's strikes, steadily advancing toward him. Unable to land a hit, Gabriel became nervous. The furious crowd screamed for the Iron Fist to finish Luca off, not to lose to a child. Luca, feeling his focus sharper than ever, realized he could predict all of Gabriel's attacks. Remembering what Quinuan had done to him, he wondered if he could replicate it now. Placing his hand on Gabriel's mechanical arm, Luca swiftly kicked Gabriel's knee, causing him to lose his balance and sending him airborne. Then, while still airborne, Gabriel took a powerful kick to the face. Launched far away, Luca felt energized, excited, and laughing, finally understanding what Quinuan saw in him. In front of Luca, Gabriel got up after taking the hit. With veins bulging and blood boiling with rage, Gabriel declared he didn't know what kind of magic Luca used, and charged toward him, asserting his attacks wouldn't work on Luca anymore, preparing to throw another punch. The punch was so strong it caused an explosion in the arena. With a psychotic grin, Luca dodged the strike, which barely grazed his face before exploding against the wall. Seizing the moment, Luca approached Gabriel, asking if he truly thought his attacks wouldn't work on him. Luca explained that if he didn't have strength, he only needed to fill that gap by using something else. With that, Luca boosted himself upward, flipped upside down, and locked Gabriel in a chokehold. With no time to react and the hold locked tightly around his neck, Gabriel maintained a tense expression. But without wasting time, Luca twisted Gabriel's neck, snapping it, and finally winning the fight. As Gabriel's body was still falling, the unharmed Luca landed in the arena. Seeing the shocked audience, Luca told them they could keep waiting for his defeat forever, but he would keep climbing to the top. Meanwhile, Gabriel's body lay on the ground behind Luca. Pulling up his hood, Luca thought he was only able to focus like that because he was in a controlled environment. Still with the audience in stunned silence, Luca walked toward the exit of the arena. Luca, bored, admitted that Quinuan was a good instructor. Quinuan, who had been waiting, praised him. With his arms crossed, Quinuan welcomed Luca to his initiation into RC's combat, and Luca acknowledged he had learned a lot from the fight. Quinuan extended his hand, asking Luca to take what he was offering. Luca took it, saw it was a credit chip, and asked if he was being paid for the fight. Quinuan replied no, explaining it was for Gabriel's treatment. He added that while generosity was good, it shouldn't make one a fool. Luca stated he wanted to be a soldier, not a good Samaritan, but Quinuan called him naive about relationships. In a serious tone, the instructor clarified he wasn't talking about charity, but investment. This would help Luca in the future. Quinuan mentioned he had spent his own investments on Torah earlier that day, reminding Luca that creating a favorable environment is what makes a good soldier. Watching Quinuan walk away, Luca understood that the instructor was actually investing in him as well, and that in the future, Quinuan would collect on his investments in a way Luca could not refuse. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Gabriel in the hospital. A doctor working on a tablet informed Gabriel that due to previous modifications to his body, he would have to use the new Zionic. Shouting, Gabriel declared he couldn't afford that model and asked if the doctor wanted to rob him too. He argued that everyone else there seemed fine with cheap bodies, but the doctor countered that no one else had made such extreme modifications. Meanwhile, Luca stood in the corner of the room, listening to everything. He realized that without his help, Gabriel wouldn't get the necessary parts. Angry, Gabriel demanded if the doctors knew how much he had spent on those modifications, not even noticing Luca. At the doorway, Luca asked how Gabriel was, adding that he was happy to see him as energetic as ever. When Gabriel saw Luca, his eyes shone with rage. With Luca in front of him, Gabriel shouted that he would destroy him, no matter what. Getting closer to Gabriel with an intimidating expression, Luca reminded him that he had warned him he'd destroy him in their fight. But then, Luca remembered Quinuan's advice, realizing he was going too far and should hold back. Walking over to the doctor, Luca asked about the Zionic model he had mentioned. He showed the credits on his chip, asking if that amount was enough, and the doctor confirmed it was. Not understanding what was going on, Gabriel asked what Luca was doing. Luca replied that he was paying for Gabriel's medical expenses. Still confused, Gabriel asked why. Hearing Luca say he just felt like it, Gabriel remarked that the nickname Good Boy fit him perfectly. Then, struggling with his own pride, Gabriel understood this was the mercy of the victor. He asked Luca for his name, and Luca confirmed it. Then, looking at Luca, Gabriel said that if Luca ever needed his help, he just had to ask. Gabriel added that he was in debt to Luca, a feeling Luca actually thought he liked. Back in the physical training arena of Acretia, two people faced each other in a ring. Wasting no time, Ali rushed toward Luca, throwing a kick toward his head. Blocking the kick with his hand, Luca kept a bored expression. Then, relaxing his hand, Luca used Arcie's combat to spin Ali and throw him away. After the training ended, Ali's body had clearly felt that session. Sitting next to Luca, Ali asked if he had learned Arcie's combat from instructor Quinuan, and Luca confirmed it. A bit confused, Ali asked if that wasn't used by bandits, and Luca replied yes, even if it was hard to believe. Then, Ali said he couldn't imagine beating Luca anymore, and Luca praised him for being the only trainee able to fight him. Knowing that going to the coliseum had been very good for him, Luca smiled, and Ali noticed he was happier than usual. Ali asked Luca if he could help him with something, and Luca agreed. Then, in the visiting room of the Empire of Acretia, Luca was irritated. Meanwhile, Ali, looking away, kept a nervous expression on his face. By Luca's side was Lillian, her red eyes staring fixedly at him. Trembling, Luca called out to Ali. Ali apologized, explaining that his family and the girls were close, and he couldn't refuse. Soon after, Lillian said she had signed up several times to visit Luca, then asked why he had been avoiding her. Luca told Lillian it was because he wasn't interested, and he thought she would realize that if he ignored her. Hearing that, Ali asked Luca to be a little nicer, but Luca told him to shut up, stating he was already irritated. Still looking at Luca, Lillian asked why he hated her. Luca replied that he had no time for women, only for his goal. Lillian asked if he wouldn't benefit from being closer to her. Luca, however, said she didn't understand, explaining that if he took advantage of her power as a noble, he could lose everything in an instant, and he wasn't aiming for that. While Ali looked down tensely, Lillian said it was strange for Luca to say that, since he was so close to Ali, who was also a noble. Luca replied to Lillian that Ali was his friend, and had nothing to do with his family. Finally, Lillian asked if Luca really wouldn't give her any chance. After finishing his drink, Luca got up, saying that unfortunately, no, and he hoped she wouldn't visit visit him again. As Luca left with a serious expression, Lillian and Allie remained seated in silence. Outside the visiting room, Allie called out Luca's name. As Allie approached, he told Luca he didn't need to be so cruel. Luca replied that otherwise Lillian wouldn't leave him alone. Allie then asked why Luca hated her so much. Luca said it was because he couldn't understand why Lillian liked him, and he thought she was planning something. But Allie said it made no sense for Luca to be afraid without knowing why, suggesting they could try more slowly. However, Luca interrupted him, asking if Allie liked Lillian, which left Allie speechless. Shocked, Allie asked Luca where he got that idea. Luca replied he noticed it from Allie's breathing and panic. With a threatening look, Luca told Allie that he wasn't interested. He added that if Allie liked Lillian, he should make his own move. Allie didn't answer, still unsettled by Luca. Bothered, Allie turned his gaze to the table where they had been sitting, thinking that, unfortunately, that was impossible for him. In a great magma pit in the city, two people sat atop a pillar near the edge of the pit. One of them was Luca, meditating and thinking he needed to stay calm no matter the situation. At Luca's side was Quinuan. Luca asked how Quinuan would have resolved the fight in Aleph's office. Recalling the situation, Luca couldn't imagine a way of getting out unharmed without a weapon. Wondering what the instructor would do, Luca listened as Quinuan told him he would have gotten under the table when the fight started. Confused, Luca said the thugs had guns, and if Quinuan hid, he'd lose any chance to attack. Quinuan said he would do that because he knew Luca would attack at the first opportunity. Luca then asked what Quinuan would do if he were alone. The instructor then said he knew what Luca was planning because Luca was trained to maximize his aggressiveness. However, if Luca had taken the fat man hostage, he would have been shot along with him. It was normal for gangs to replace their boss. But before that could happen, Quinuan would have destroyed them and escaped with Luca through a secret passage. Looking at the instructor, Luca realized Quinuan not only predicted what Luca would do, but also had an escape route in mind. Luca couldn't grasp the teacher's mind. Quinuan said Arcee's technique used the whole brain to heighten perception. Hearing this, Luca understood that brain problems came from constantly pushing it to the limit. After thinking for a moment, Luca asked Quinuan if using the Legion wouldn't allow him to use Arcee's combat style. The instructor confirmed. Quinuan explained that upon becoming a guard, Luca would be gifted a Legion, which uses memory signals to access all brain resources. That meant there wouldn't be any extra resources left for Arcee's technique while using the Legion. Disappointed, Luca knew the teacher hid this because of how he'd react. But if he'd known earlier, he wouldn't have learned it. Seeing Luca leaving, Quinuan wondered if this was the end. Luca thanked the instructor for everything. Still watching Luca, Quinuan said that if Luca changed his mind, he was always welcome there. Still very tense, Luca left without another word. Inside a room of the Empire, Luca stood still. He heard someone say that 3 months had passed. It was Castoria, explaining he had been busy and hadn't had time to meet with the trainees. The commander asked Luca how he was doing, guessing he had been called because of the rebellions. Luca replied that he had been training alone. Castoria then stated that Luca hadn't been called for any recent missions, adding that he wasn't going to be, as he was already strong enough. Luca thanked the commander. Castoria then asked if he had been training with Quinuan lately, making Luca wonder if that was why he had been summoned. Luca thought the Empire's high command must have noticed his activities because of his visits to the slums, the black market, and his participation in the coliseum. Castoria then asked if Luca had been training Arcee's combat with Quinuan. Luca replied that he wasn't anymore. Castoria then stated that since Arcee's combat couldn't be used with the Legion, it was meaningless for someone from the Empire. He added that he understood Luca's position. Those without talent were discarded by Quinuan, while the talented found no reason to learn it. That's why Quinuan was the only Arcee's user. Looking at Castoria, Luca asked if he wanted him to continue learning Arcee's combat. Castoria replied that he wanted Luca to maintain a good relationship with Quinuan, so he should continue. He emphasized that this was an order. Surprised, Luca wondered why Castoria was being so cautious with a retired soldier like Quinuan, but he knew better than to ask. Luca replied that he would follow orders. Castoria then told him to remember that he was always watching him closely, concluding that Luca was the type to reach the top, even from the lower sector. Meanwhile, Quinuan, looking at a toy helmet, remarked that he hadn't expected such a quick return from his trainee. He reiterated that he had told Luca to come back anytime and wouldn't ask any more questions. Luca thanked him. Still looking at Quinuan, Luca thought it would have been harder to convince him to teach again. Luca asked Quinuan why they were there today. Quinuan retorted by asking if the kids still liked those toys. Turning to the shop owner, Quinuan declared he would buy all the toys there and asked for them to be delivered. The shop owner asked if he had heard correctly, while Luca, equally surprised, wondered why Quinuan was buying them. Upon arriving Arriving at the location, Luca understood why. He asked Quinuan if this was an orphanage. Quinuan told Luca to set the boxes of toys down and rest for a bit. Then, Luca heard someone calling him. Behind him stood Gabriel, irritated and carrying the boxes. He asked Luca if he thought he was a baggage handler. Luca remembered that the big man had offered him help back at the hospital, and it would be much easier since the shop didn't deliver. Gabriel retorted that he had offered help for something bigger, like a fight or something similar. Smiling, Luca replied that he didn't need Gabriel's help in a fight. Still looking at the bald man, Luca noticed that the implant of a new spine had slightly improved Gabriel's balance. As they looked toward Quinuan near the door, Gabriel asked Luca who that man was. He then added that Luca should have heard of him if he was really that infamous, since even Aleph couldn't handle him. Luca told Gabriel that if he were him, he wouldn't stick his nose where it didn't belong, unless he wanted to lose his head. Looking at the place, Luca thought this was probably the orphanage where Quinuan had grown up, which was why Quinuan was doing charity there. Several children from the orphanage came running toward the two men. While the children thanked them, Luca and Gabriel handed out the gifts. Gabriel then grumbled that the kids were rude after one of them called him ugly. Soon, two children started fighting over one of the boxes to see who would get the gift. Seeing the scene, Luca remembered his own childhood and how nothing was ever fair. He realized you had to grow stronger to obtain things through power. While Luca was lost in thought, someone came up behind him and called his name. When Luca turned, he saw it was Quinuan, calling him to talk alone. Leaning against a fence, Quinuan said that from time to time, he visited the lower sector. He praised the director, noting he was doing a great job since they didn't receive much for taking care of the orphanage. Curious, Luca asked Quinuan if he had grown up there. Quinuan replied that he had already forgotten such things and had just stopped by chance. He added that perhaps he had even visited the orphanage where Luca had grown up. Staring at Quinuan, Luca thought it made him seem like just a normal retired soldier. A retired soldier, stripped of his glory, with a damaged nervous system from a brain injury. Luca wondered if that would be his future if he lived that long. Quinuan asked them to get straight to the point. In a threatening tone, he asked Luca who had told him to come back and seek him out. With his combat eyes activated, Quinuan turned toward Luca and asked if it had been Commander Castoria. Luca, in shock, stared at the instructor without moving. Then, turning his face forward and fixing his gaze on Quinuan, Luca asked what the man meant by that. How could Quinuan know the chief's orders? Was he hiding something dangerous? Was that why Castoria was concerned? As Luca started preparing for an attack, he thought that if that were the case, he would probably have to eliminate Quinuan. However, looking straight at Luca, Quinuan told him to calm down if he wanted to stay alive. He also said that if Luca attacked him with full force, it would be hard to stop him without sending him to a better place. Luca, sweating nervously, stated he was a soldier of the Empire, and that was the only thing he could say. Then, Quinuan said Luca knew so little he didn't even know which path to follow. Placing a hand on Luca's shoulder, Quinuan said he wouldn't judge him, since it was normal for a soldier to follow orders from his superiors. Quinuan then asked Luca if he thought the first time he went to Quinuan was truly of his own will. When Luca manipulated the projectile's trajectory without a combat eye, the high-ranking officers had already begun preparations. They finally had someone who could learn Arces like Quinuan. Luca might think it was his own will, but it wasn't. Luca, in shock, didn't want to believe all of this was calculated by the Empire. He wanted to believe it was all his own choice. So he told the instructor that it was his decision. Quinuan replied that everyone was a slave to someone, whether they knew it or not. Staring at Luca, Quinuan said he probably wanted to run from the truth now, because after all, he was still young. As he left, Quinuan told Luca that he should return soon and feel free to report this to the commander. The reflective soldier thought he didn't believe Quinuan's words, but as Quinuan said, the chief wanted him to keep learning Arces. With his thoughts clashing, Luca tried not to dwell on the teacher's words and not to doubt the Empire. But what if even his desire to succeed wasn't truly his own? Sometime later, in the Empire's simulated training room, Luca, in armor, sat on a bench at the far end of the room. Looking down, he was frustrated that he couldn't report to the commander the day before. If he had, they would have put him through a psychological exam, and with the confusion in his mind, he would score lower than before. Besides, the Empire didn't forgive those with dangerous ideologies and could expel him from the Imperial Guard, sending him to a camp. Then, remembering the other day, Luca thought Quinuan must have already known he would hesitate to report this to the chief. Soon after, a door opened, releasing smoke into the room. Then, L.A. emerged from the training room, looking completely exhausted. While panting, he suddenly caught a bottle thrown in his direction. It was Luca. Seeing his friend training, Luca said Ele seemed different. Ele replied that he'd been working harder since losing to Luca. Ele the blonde asked if Luca had come just to cheer for a friend, saying he was happy, but Luca replied that he obviously had a request. Luca recalled that Ele once said some families bought the tests. Ele replied that it was a very serious secret. Looking at Ele, Luca asked how he passed the psychological aptitude test. Ele, staring at him, asked if Luca knew that was a very dangerous thing to ask. Sitting down, Luca said he checked to make sure no one else was around. Ele said he wouldn't ask why, but there was a trick. It was to create a simplified version of your ego to interact with the world, hiding your real ego and showing only what was favorable for the exam. Meanwhile, the confused Luca questioned him. Ele replied that there were cases where people lost memories or changed personalities due to trauma, so they were just doing that consciously. Luca wondered if that was even possible. If he acted like a loyal soldier, this new ego would develop in his mind, and that's what Ele had done 2 months before the test. The only problem was that doing this for too long could make him forget his real ego. Luca asked where Ele learned it, while thinking that by using this method, he would just need to pretend to be his old self before meeting Ele and Quinuan. Looking at Luca, El said he didn't know what Luca was trying to do, but asked him to be careful, because tampering with the psychological test was something very serious. Luca said he never thought he'd hear that from the blonde, as his combat eyes suddenly activated, catching him by surprise. Quinuan was trying to communicate with Luca. The two then met again in the lower sectors, standing in front of a building. Staring at the structure, Quinuan told Luca that today would be a simple training exercise. Quinuan praised the building, noting it was well built for a gang hideout. Luca, however, felt a pang of unease. Quinuan was treating him normally, as if nothing had happened at the orphanage, and that bothered Luca. The instructor then told Luca he had 20 seconds. In front of a locked door, Quinuan instructed Luca to take down all the gangsters inside. Luca replied that he understood. He then placed his hand on the door lock, blasting it open with a loud noise. Inside the room, several gangsters were relaxing. Hearing the sound of the door, one of the thugs stood up. Meanwhile, Luca was already inside, heading toward the man who stared back at him. Standing face to face, the thug asked what Luca wanted, adding that he didn't look like a customer. Calmly, Luca observed that one of the thugs was coming straight at him with a weapon. Analyzing the environment, he realized there were 3 armed thugs, one who seemed to be their leader, and someone else in the bathroom. Then, pointing his gun at Luca's head, the thug said he was unlucky for having to do this to a kid. But before he could finish speaking, he took a punch to the stomach and ended up on the ceiling, without even seeing what had happened. The other 3 thugs stared at their friend stuck to the ceiling, unable to believe what had just occurred. Meanwhile, Luca, with his fists clenched, muttered that his mind had been too troubled lately, and he was going to let it out a little. The unconscious thug on the ceiling dropped his gun. As the other thugs continued to stare at their friend on the ceiling, the gun fell toward the floor. They then stood up, ready to shoot Luca. However, Luca stretched his arm to grab the falling gun. With the weapon already in his hand, Luca quickly aimed at the thugs, firing and hitting each one in the arms, disarming them. On the other side of the room, the gang leader aimed his weapon at Luca, firing several times in his direction while cursing him. Without much trouble, Luca dodged all the shots and remarked that it was unbelievable someone so bad could be a gang leader. Then Luca aimed his weapon toward the bathroom door. The door opened, and another thug, pants down and holding a shock device, stepped out, wondering what was going on. Seeing the whole situation in front of him, he wondered what all the commotion was about. Still aiming at the thug, Luca told him to knock himself out if he didn't want to lose a few limbs. Looking at his shock device, the thug thought for a moment about what he should do. After that, a bright light and electric sparks filled the entire room. Luca stood in front of the fallen thug on the ground, saying he still felt someone's presence in the bathroom. When he entered the room, he saw the body of a woman, naked and sitting on the floor. Luca's expression changed, filling with rage. While cursing the thugs, he also noticed that the girl was tied up with ropes. Already outside the room, Quinuan told Luca it had taken him about 12 seconds to take care of them all. Quinuan clapped, congratulating Luca as he carried the girl out, using his shirt to cover her body. Still angry, Luca asked if they couldn't just finish those guys off, but Quinuan replied no. Since they were outsiders, it would cause too much noise. Quinuan told Luca he knew there were people in the world too weak to defend themselves. That woman had suffered that fate because she didn't have the strength to defend herself, and Luca had become powerful so he wouldn't end up like that. Normally, Luca would call people like her idiots, but at that moment, he couldn't feel anything except disgust. After that day, Quinuan continued taking Luca to the lower sectors instructors, throwing him into fights without any prior information. Quinuan wasn't doing this to teach Luca to win, but to help him adapt to different situations by analyzing his surroundings. Even after several such fights, the instructor kept sending Luca into them without saying anything. Inside a repair shop in the lower sector, a red-haired girl in glasses and a blue jumpsuit greeted them. Quinuan called her Gilda, asking for a cup of black coffee with a layer of oil on top. Luca requested the same, but without the oil. Luca then asked if they really needed to stop there. The instructor, Quinuan, asked if Luca didn't feel proud to visit the woman he had saved. Luca had saved Gilda from a gang. Apparently, she had been kidnapped and endured horrible things, but her mind remained intact, and she managed to return to a normal life. The reason for the kidnapping, Quinuan explained, was because of a friend. He clarified that Gilda was from an orphanage and had a talent for engineering as a child, so he had anonymously paid for her studies. She never knew about it. Luca then asked Quinuan if he had known Gilda from the very beginning. Suddenly, someone expressed surprise upon entering the shop. Quinuan and Luca, seated, looked up. It was Gabriel. Seeing Luca, Gabriel asked what he was doing there, then ordered a beer from Gilda. She recommended he stop drinking, as his system was already fatigued from work. After saving Gilda, Quinuan had introduced her to Gabriel. Gabriel became her bodyguard, and she, in turn, became his mechanic. Luca, looking at the big guy, suggested he should listen to his mechanic. Gabriel, the bodyguard, got annoyed, insisting it was just one beer. Then Quinuan, the bald man, asked Luca what he was thinking, messing with all those thugs. The gang leaders were already making a plan against Luca, and Quinuan warned that not even he would be able to protect Gilda. But Quinuan told them not to worry, as the gang wouldn't come back there for a while. Gilda, concerned, asked how long exactly. Quinuan replied it could be a few months or even years. Luca thought he wouldn't be able to go to the lower sectors alone, as his superiors wouldn't allow it. Looking at Gilda and Quinuan, Luca thought that might be the last time he would see them. Even after the tragic episode, Gilda had returned to her life and work, while Gabriel continued to face increasing risks at his job. However, Luca told himself not to pity them. Perhaps not being able to return there again would be better for his current situation, Luca thought, drinking his coffee. Back in the Empire, Castoria's office doors were closed. Inside, Luca had just reported on his mission, and Chief Castoria remarked that Quinuan kept doing strange things. Castoria also noted that Luca became a trainee late and normally wouldn't have had that opportunity, but at that time, the Empire needed it. Even Castoria, the commander, didn't truly know what kind of man Quinuan was. When Castoria was a recruit, Quinuan was already a key member of the Imperial Guard. Castoria assumed Quinuan was a discreet specialist in secret operations, and Luca was surprised. Moreover, it seemed Quinuan, the instructor, really liked Luca. Out of all the trainees Quinuan had taken, Luca was the only one still lasting. Castoria said Luca was excellent but vulnerable to negative influences, so he would schedule a psychological evaluation for him. Nodding, Luca already imagined that would happen. With a hand on his face, Castoria said he would be frank. There were two paths for trainees with this kind of mission. Either they were eliminated to keep the secret, or they ascended to the heart of the Imperial Guard as a reward for their contribution. Castoria hoped Luca would ascend, but Luca replied that he was only following orders. If that operation ended well, Luca trusted that Castoria, the commander, would help him. Castoria had a smile on his face. Castoria then replied that if Luca's results were good, he would adopt him as his son. Luca Castoria? Sounds good, the chief said, laughing. Luca kept a surprised expression, wondering if that was real. Was it really true that Chief Centurion Castoria wanted him as his son? Luca wondered. Meanwhile, still thinking about that, Luca was lined up to take the psychological test. The robot conducting the test told Luca they would begin the exam. The robot also said it detected happiness in Luca's expression, asking if something good had happened. Laughing, Luca told the robot it was none of its business and ordered it to start the test already. Elsewhere, someone punched a punching bag. Ilya landed a series of blows, tossing the bag from side to side. He then finished the sequence with a powerful kick. Sweat dripped onto the floor. Then, Ilya prepared to deliver one final powerful punch, sending the punching bag flying. With heavy breathing, Ilya finally finished his training. He took a green, oil-like liquid from a small container. With an uncomfortable expression, Ilya rubbed the liquid onto his elbow joints. Luca, sitting next to him, remarked that Ilya had trained until his joints were worn out, wondering if this was truly the Ilya he knew. With a smile, Luca asked Ilya if he had passed the psychological exam. Ilya confirmed, assuring Luca that he would be there to help if anything happened. Seriously, Ilya admitted he couldn't reveal details at that moment, but would soon ask Luca for a favor. He then asked if that was all right. Hearing that, Luca observed his friend. He responded that if Ilya was ever in danger during combat, he would save him, even if it meant risking his own life. Ilya then thanked Luca, promising to explain everything soon, though he hoped it wouldn't turn out the way Luca was imagining. Luca would have been lying if he said he wasn't curious, but he decided not to interfere, letting things unfold in their own time. Having performed well on the psychological exam and gained the chief's trust, Luca's immediate goal was to become a member of the Castoria family. It was the only thing on his mind at that moment. Meanwhile, the commander announced the formation of a new special military order. Its purpose was to suppress rebels, and it comprised 3 families, led by the Ramones. Upon hearing the Ramones' name, Luca became startled and looked at Ilya. Remembering Lillian, Luca realized he understood the favor Ilya wanted to ask. Soon after, several soldiers boarded an army train, which then shot off at high speed. Luca then introduced himself as the leader of the 21st Army Suppression Battalion, and his subordinates quickly saluted him. High-ranking officers, Luca realized, clearly intended to use army trainees as platoon leaders, viewing the entire operation as mere training. His platoon was divided into 2, totaling 27 people, with Sergeant Kodrak serving as his orders assistant. Composed largely of veterans, they knew they were being used as tools for the trainees' training. This made it harder for them to follow his orders, but Luca knew he still had to take control. Luca considered 2 options. The first was to leave everything to Kodrak, and the second, Kodrak, startled, turned as Luca declared in a threatening tone that he was superior to all of them. They would follow his orders, and any disobedience would be punished. Luca had chosen to use force, aiming to shatter his allies' doubt and distrust as they all stared at him. However, the surgeon placed his hand on Luca's shoulder, calling to him and asking if they could talk for a moment. But Luca quickly grabbed the surgeon's arm, surprising him, then threw him toward the other soldiers. Luca demanded to know how he dared touch his superior without permission, and if he wasn't taking this seriously because of his age. As he walked, Luca stated that he too was from the lower sectors and an orphanage, but he asked if they knew the big difference between them. Upon reaching the surgeon, Luca looked down at him and declared that the difference was his immense superiority to all of them. They might not understand it at that moment, but they soon would. He was the best platoon leader they would ever see. The surgeon, still kneeling, listened to all of this without a word. Then, standing up, Kodrak responded, stating he understood his mistake and would be more careful. Luca then turned away. Luca realized the surgeon understood his attitude and that he had not chosen the easy way out. Meanwhile, at the rebel stronghold against the Empire, a large triangular ship approached. Inside, the rebels' suppression platoon stood in formation. With a hand on his face and in disbelief, Ile sighed upon learning that his friend had used force against one of his own platoon members. Luca then responded, explaining that if he were nice, they wouldn't respect him. In their eyes, he was just a kid. Suddenly, the lighting in the room changed, surprising everyone. A man on stage, addressing all the soldiers, announced they would skip the formalities. The commander explained that the rebels occupied an arcane civilization post, controlling all operations from there. The location was fortified by 2 walls, a high-density dome-like force barrier, and 5 arcane anti-aircraft towers. The 11th Brigade, clad in full-body armor, was tasked with destroying these towers, while the remaining forces would launch a flanking attack. Clearly, the Empire was deploying considerable power. The commander then announced that the operation would commence in an hour and a half, urging them to complete all preparations by then. Soon after, Ile and Luca found themselves outside their vehicles. Despite anticipating this, Ile wondered how their role as mere support differed from a picnic. Meanwhile, Luca explained that the Empire didn't want them to be destroyed. After a moment of thought, Ile looked at Luca. Just as Ile was about to speak, Luca cut him off, asking if he was trying to bring up the Ramones family. Luca added that even if they were close, there was nothing they could do. If Ile got involved with the rebels, not even his own family would be able to save him. Ile replied that he wasn't expecting a miracle, but if there was any chance, he hoped to at least save Lillian. An angry Luca then asked if Ile loved her so much that it was worth his life. Ile answered that Lillian had been his first love. Luca, telling Ile to man up, declared that he had turned a blind eye until now, but this crossed the line. He warned Ile that he would be killed if he tried to save Lillian. Turning his back and walking away, Luca told Ile not to do anything stupid, taking it as a final warning. With a serious face, Ile replied that he understood. He then turned the opposite way from Luca and and walked off. However, because of Arky's strength, Ile knew Luca's words were a lie. Ile's friend, Luca, was planning to save Lillian at any cost. It didn't matter if Ile accepted it or not. Lillian, however, needed to be destroyed for her own good. Ile hoped it would happen amid the chaos, and that Lillian wouldn't meet him while still alive. That was Ile's last desperate wish. As Luca looked at his helmet, he thought the important thing was protecting the head and chest. If those two areas remained intact, Imperial soldiers wouldn't die. Then Kodrak approached, calling for the squad leader. Luca responded by asking what he wanted. The surgeon Kodrak said he knew Luca's capabilities and had checked with the higher-ups. Luca then asked, "So what?" Continuing, Kodrak requested that when they entered combat, Luca should also listen to his words, as Kodrak had served the Empire for 10 years. Luca told Kodrak not to worry, assuring him he would listen to anyone who made a valid suggestion. Kodrak then thanked him. Moments later, the ship touched down. They had arrived near the rebel base. The ship doors then opened, revealing the armored brigade disembarking. This was the Myrmidon Model Brigade, clad in full-body mechanical armor. This group was in charge of neutralizing the towers. Only after their success would the other brigades come into play. An order to open fire was given, and the entire armored brigade activated their thrusters. They all advanced in the same direction, moving so fast that they left a fiery trail in the sky behind them. They maintained formation, heading directly for the rebel base's anti-aircraft towers. Meanwhile, the towers began charging a large amount of energy for their attack. Then, opening a compartment in his chest plate, one of the soldiers unleashed a rain of missiles aimed at a tower. Simultaneously, the tower fired an energy beam toward the brigade's soldiers, who swiftly dodged it. After the tower's first attack, the soldiers launched another explosive strike at the barrier, sending more missiles at its base. A massive explosion erupted, but the barriers still remained standing. Amidst the cloud of dust raised by the explosion, two red eyes appeared. It was one of the soldiers, still relentlessly advancing toward the tower. As he approached, the tower fired another shot, which again failed to hit the soldier. Then, very close to the tower, the soldier prepared to strike with full force. Using his spear, he delivered a powerful blow toward the barrier. With the spear's impact, the barrier began to crack. Meanwhile, the other soldiers kept firing missiles at the barrier to weaken it. Finally, the barrier shattered under the armored brigade's power. Watching everything from inside the ship, Luca was surprised at how quickly they managed to bring the barrier down. Now they had to neutralize the towers according to the plan, within 1 minute of entry. If they failed, they would be at a disadvantage. If the armored brigade didn't take care of the towers, the suppression forces would have to bear the brunt and do it themselves. Then, an order was transmitted. The towers had been neutralized. They were to proceed to the next stage of the operation. The battlefield was cruel and dangerous, but also where men found joy and adrenaline, and Luca loved it. Without that joy and adrenaline, he would have gone insane a long time ago. As Luca headed toward the exit, he ordered his battalion to follow him, thinking this was the perfect time to test his skills. The plan was for the infantry to enter from all directions at once, leaving no room for rebels to escape. The fort's underground tunnels were a labyrinth. They had a map from old expeditions, but the rebels had modified the tunnels. Amid the war and explosions, the soldiers advanced toward the fort. Then, one of the soldiers remarked that the rebels had probably limited the underground entrances to prevent the Myrmidons from getting in. Arriving at the entrance, the soldiers in formation remained cautious about the situation. Luca declared he would take the lead from there. Kodrak immediately countered that it was risky in such a place, likely riddled with traps. Luca then asked if the sergeant was afraid of dealing with the consequences of his death, to which Kodrak replied, yes. But before Kodrak could continue speaking, Luca closed his helmet. He stated he didn't care what happened if he went down. Advancing quickly, Luca reiterated that he would lead the way and ordered them to follow him. He had felt a chill down his spine, as if the men behind him were ready to take him out, but he didn't have time for that now. Thinking about the girl, Luca remembered he needed to eliminate Lillian before Ailey arrived to rescue her. His friend was probably also in the tunnels now, at a different point, advancing quickly with his troops. He could do the same by sacrificing his men, but he couldn't let his emotions take over and lose loyal soldiers. He would take all the risks upon himself, Luca thought, just as a trap activated above his head. Seeing this, Kodrak shouted Luca's name. In the blink of an eye, Luca drew his sword and cut the trap's pipe, which had been triggered by his movement. Using Arky's method, Luca had heightened all his senses to the maximum. Even taste, and the ability to sense chemical traces, allowed him access to various information. sensation. Meanwhile, the soldiers stared at Luca, all of them shocked. Luca felt his arteries expand, his heart beating faster, and the pressure in his brain pushed him to his limit. Still advancing at high speed, he was frustrated that his men were so slow, and he felt like punching Kodrak. He knew it in theory, but now he could feel in practice that prolonged use of Arces caused gradual brain damage. Luca was reaching the door. On the other side, several rebel soldiers waited nervously for any movement when, suddenly, Luca kicked the door hard, sending it flying along with one of the enemy soldiers. The other soldiers immediately prepared for combat, aiming their weapons at Luca. Luca grabbed his sword as the enemies fired in his direction. Still in the same spot, Luca blocked every incoming bullet with his sword. The moment the barrage ceased, he surged forward, instantly dispatching 2 enemies in a gruesome display of ketchup flying everywhere. He then drew his blade across the neck of a third, sending him to a swift end. The last remaining soldier, stunned, shouldered a bazooka and fired it at Luca, but with an effortless swing, Luca bisected the projectile mid-air, causing the bazooka to detonate before it could even reach him. As smoke billowed from the explosion, the rebel soldier couldn't discern Luca's fate. The rebel prayed it was over, but suddenly, Luca emerged from the smoke, charging directly at him. Startled, the rebel found it was already too late. There was nothing the rebel could do. Just then, the Imperial platoon arrived, witnessing the gruesome scene and the ketchup flying. Kodrak, observing the carnage, wore a terrified expression. Luca, his sword still dripping, then asked the sergeant what he was waiting for. He declared they were moving forward and ordered him to keep up. Suddenly, several rebel soldiers unleashed heavy gunfire, their shots aimed directly at the Imperial soldiers hiding behind a wall. Analyzing the situation, Luca hadn't anticipated such a spacious interior, likely indicating established defensive lines. Checking his map, he realized they had advanced significantly and would soon encounter the evacuating nobles. He then deployed a flying camera to analyze the enemy formation. The camera footage revealed approximately 100 troops, along with several non-combatants. Lillian could be among them. The sergeant informed Luca that their platoon was far ahead of the others and suggested they wait for another squad. It was a logical suggestion, especially since Luca's brain was overloaded from the excessive use of Arce's combat system. Suddenly, gunfire erupted again, but this time, it wasn't aimed at their position. The shots were directed elsewhere. Realizing this, Luca saw that another Imperial group had arrived almost simultaneously. He immediately ordered his soldiers to advance, capitalizing on the rebels' distraction. The rebels redirected their fire toward the newly arrived group, which had already formed a defensive line with shields. However, the sheer power and speed of the rebel fire meant the shields wouldn't last more than a few seconds. Luca muttered, "Not yet." He knew some of the rebels' weapons were powerful enough to penetrate his armor, demanding extreme caution. The rebels possessed about 8 high-powered weapons, so Luca needed to wait for a moment when at least half of them were reloading. Realizing the opportune moment had arrived, Luca vaulted over his subordinates, ordering them to spread out and take cover. The rebels immediately focused their fire on Luca. Seeing their leader exposed without shields, Kodrak was startled. However, light arms fire, such as pistols and rifles, couldn't penetrate Luca's armor. Once on the ground, he drew his own weapon, targeting the rebels' truly threatening high-powered weapons. He fired, detonating them in a series of explosions. Repositioning swiftly, Luca moved into the heart of the enemy formation, preventing them from getting a clear shot. Then, with a blur of his sword, he severed 2 rebels' legs as if they were mere leaves. In this chaotic situation, Luca knew he was unstoppable. One rebel, terrified of kicking the bucket, immediately surrendered. Luca ordered Kodrak to capture all the surrendered rebels, and Kodrak promptly obeyed. Scanning the battlefield, Luca saw several Imperial soldiers' bodies on the ground. Identifying them, he realized they belonged to LA's platoon. His friend was advancing, but at the cost of his own men. He's so desperate, he's sacrificing his own men, Luca thought, seething with anger and disbelief. Luca wanted to save LA, but as an Imperial soldier, he had to choose between his friend and his mission, sacrificing one for the other. If he found Lillian, he would have to eliminate her on the spot. Luca didn't care if LA hated him, as long as he could save her life. He then told Kodrak to leave and regroup with another platoon. Kodrak, the surgeon, then addressed Luca, stating that his combat skills were shocking and that he was an excellent soldier, but not a good commander. Luca replied that if he hadn't been the commander, they would have taken more losses, and asked what the problem was. Kodrak's answer was that Luca had left his men more than once and gone off alone, which did not make him a good commander. Annoyed by this, Luca replied that he acted alone because his men were inferior and wouldn't understand his commands. He added that he'd be annoyed hearing them whine about not being utilized. Kodrak countered that Luca wouldn't be the strongest forever. Luca then told Kodrak he could mock him when that day came, and Kodrak said he'd remember that. As Kodrak walked away, Luca added that he would keep the warning in mind, and if his methods were indeed wrong, he would reflect on Kodrak's words. Kodrak then wished Luca the best, thinking he didn't know such an open mind could exist alongside such a big ego. As Luca advanced, he noticed scorched walls and noble bodies on the ground. The same was probably happening in the other corridors, since the suppression force had already entered the tunnels. Luca had to admit, his friend wasn't just someone he trusted in battle, he was truly his friend. But this friend was burning through Imperial troops for personal reasons, sacrificing them unnecessarily. A good platoon would never risk their soldiers' lives just to chase rebels. Even if his friend managed to find Lillian, there was no way to get her out of there. Her fate would be the same. Luca understood that his friend loved her, but he didn't need to go down with her. It was just an outburst of emotion. Then, hearing a noise, Luca spotted a man, whose head was visible, who immediately declared his surrender, and identified himself as a member of the Ramones family. Luca stated he didn't care whether the man surrendered or not, only if he knew where Lillian Ramones was. Looking down, the hostage claimed he didn't know where Lillian was. However, Luca noticed the man's gaze shift as he answered, confirming he was lying. Luca grabbed the man's eye, making him scream and ask what he was doing. Luca then asked which way Lillian had run, stating this was the hostage's last chance. The hostage then answered that she had gone down, adding that he didn't know if there was a shortcut, as he wasn't a direct member of the family. Luca asked the hostage if he'd seen his friend. The hostage replied yes, claiming it was Luca's friend who had left him in this state, barely alive. He called Luca's friend crazy, stating they knew each other, but before he could finish speaking, Luca executed him, sending a fountain of blood into the air. Walking away, Luca rationalized that the man would have been executed anyway, so it was better to make it painless. Normally, Luca felt nothing when executing people, but today, of all days, he was a bit shaken. The screams and pistol shots were getting closer. If his friend had decided not to return, what then should Luca do? He wondered. Meanwhile, Luca stood in the middle of a room, surrounded by bodies on the floor. Despite the chaos, Luca recalled how his friendship with his friend always made him paranoid about the future. Now, however, the question of what he would do if his friend betrayed the Empire demanded an answer. Determined to face the situation, Luca stepped through a door amid fallen bodies. Immediately after, he walked down a corridor filled with slain soldiers. Upon seeing the destroyed hall, Luca immediately called out his friend's name. With his back turned, the blonde man slightly turned his head to confirm that Luca had finally arrived. At this point, Luca accused him of leading his own men to their deaths for personal desires. Right in front of Luca, the young blonde man stood protecting a small group. The intruder recognized Vigo Ramones and his descendants, noting Lillian among them. He then confronted Luca, claiming all the destruction had happened because of her. Luca, his hand on his weapon, acknowledged that the intruder wouldn't be able to ignore the incident. The intruder then challenged Luca directly, telling him to draw his weapon. Drawing his own sword, Luca replied he would knock some sense into the intruder's head. At that moment, Luca prepared for battle, aware that despite theory, a real fight had many variables. Seeing the Ramones family retreating, the intruder understood Luca was only buying time for their escape. For that reason, he decided he needed to eliminate the family first, even if Luca hated him for the rest of his life. That way, he concluded he wouldn't have to bear his friend's blood on his hands. However, Luca realized the intruder's intention and shouted that Lillian was now the target. Immediately, the intruder advanced, but was intercepted by a shot from his former ally, Luca. Luca kept firing to block the intruder's path. Luca explained that firearms were useless, but trajectory prediction allowed them to be used to slow an enemy down. However, the intruder revealed he had forced the amplification of his cybernetic signals before the mission to increase his speed. That meant it was impossible for Luca to slow him with that shot. The Ramones family guards reacted, aiming their weapons at the intruder. Without difficulty, he deflected the first projectile with his gauntlet. The shot immediately bounced back toward one of the guards, startling him. Without hesitation, the attacker spun and struck the second family guard with his sword. Vigo Ramones screamed desperately for him to stop. Ignoring the plea, the attacker's blade pierced Vigo's head without pause. With the guards out of the way, the intruder advanced directly against the father and mother, killing them. After eliminating his targets, he turned and declared that now only Lillian remained. While Luca struggled to stop him, the assassin claimed he had more than enough time to kill her. Facing Lillian Ramones, the intruder said he wouldn't forget her until she was dead. With his sword poised, he prepared for the strike, adding that he would give her a painless death, as it was the best he could offer. The young woman stared back at him and began to laugh, even with tears streaming down her face. While Lillian laughed, Luca shouted desperately at the intruder to stop. With a quick movement, Luca lunged at the warrior and pushed him away from Lillian. With that, the two fell together while Lillian watched the scene from afar. Soon, Lillian caught her breath and turned toward the confrontation. Quickly, the the attacker pinned Luca to the ground, pressing the blade of his sword against his neck. Even pinned down, Luca asked if the intruder hadn't seen Lillian's face, amused by watching her own family die. Not understanding, Luca heard the intruder's explanation. Lillian was finally free, as she had only been used as a marriage tool. Irritated by the answer, Luca asked him what he was talking about. Then, the intruder stood up, leaving Luca lying on the ground. The intruder then ordered Luca to stop defending Lillian, because in the end, she was nothing but a traitor. With Lillian's help, Luca stood up and revealed that the families had been labeled traitors only as an excuse to kill them. He continued, arguing that if they were truly traitors, their defense wouldn't have been so weak. Considering his own arguments, Luca realized his reasoning wasn't wrong. The fortress invasion had been difficult, but afterward everything seemed far too easy, as the family's forces were very small. Even with the logic presented, the intruder stared at Luca and questioned what importance that held. Luca realized that, at this rate, Ailey would end up dying along with Lillian. Even as Ailey tried to stop her, Lillian revealed that her father was not innocent. He had hidden an arcane relic. Turning to Luca, Lillian revealed that the relic was the real reason for the Empire's attack. With that, she revealed the artifact, explaining that it was thanks to it they were able to operate the fortress. Not understanding, Luca questioned the reason for the revelation, but Lillian claimed to know he didn't truly want to kill her. Next, Lillian stated that Luca simply didn't want Ailey to hate him, which left the warrior without a reaction. Lillian pointed out that Luca's real concern was that Ailey might end up dying at the hands of the Empire. Soon, she proposed an option that could benefit all three, revealing that the relic could activate the teleportation device in the underground fortress. Keeping her eyes fixed on Luca, Lillian asked for help so they could escape the Empire's control. In the end, Lillian extended the relic toward Luca, leaving him to make the decision. Upon hearing about a teleportation device, Luca questioned its existence, but Lillian confirmed it was a secret escape route in the tunnels. With that, she said Luca could kill her if he didn't trust her. However, she asked for help to activate the teleport, as she also didn't want Ailey to die. Lillian then suggested they escape so Luca could lie in his report, but Luca doubted the Empire would leave such a device behind. Lillian then assured him that only the direct line of the Ramuna's family knew about the device, stating they would be safe underground. While pondering the difficult choice, Luca was aware that he didn't care about Lillian's fate. His greatest concern was for Ailey's safety, as his friend's ideas could get him killed, and it would be easy to forge his disappearance on the battlefield. After reflecting, Luca lifted his head, the decision finally made. Soon, he interrupted Ailey and demanded he promise him one thing before they continued. Luca then imposed the condition. If the teleport failed, Ailey must not get in his way, reminding him that not even Lillian wanted his death. Luca stared closely at Ailey, waiting for his promise. With that, Ailey finally raised his head and promised to keep the deal. Thus, Ailey stood and led the way down the stairs, while Luca followed right behind them. While Ailey and Lillian moved ahead, Luca positioned himself at the entrance to ensure their passage. Luca then acknowledged that he had lost, for not only had he failed to stop Ailey, he was now helping the fugitive. As they advanced, Ailey called for Luca to wait, making Luca turn toward him. Lillian then approached and started wiping the blood from Ailey's face before it dried. With that, Luca urged them on, saying they were lucky to still be alive and should just get married already. Holding hands, Lillian apologized to Ailey, saying she never imagined things would reach this point. Ailey reassured her, explaining that she was the one who taught him about the world and changed his way of seeing things. Ailey continued, stating that if it weren't for her, he would have already gone mad, for he finally realized he wasn't strange, just different. Observing the scene, Luca concluded that it was Lillian who put those ideas into Ailey's head. Luca understood that such thinking could spread and bring down the Empire, opening the way for an enemy invasion. Determined not to allow the nation's ruin, Luca decided he must eliminate any danger with his own hands, even if that danger was Ailey. With that, Luca reaffirmed to himself that he was not a traitor. Upon reaching the tunnel, Luca finally breathed in relief, while Lillian confirmed that it was a secret route. Soon after, Lillian revealed that her father was manipulated by the Emperor after discovering how to activate the fortress. Luca then asked how much longer they would be going down, and Lillian pointed out they were close, just past the corridor. When Lillian thanked him, Luca replied that he was only paying a debt to Ailey, and that next time, she would be dead. Next, Luca bid farewell to Ailey, telling him to stay safe, which left Ailey in silence. Lillian then began talking about a plan for when they managed to get out of there. Thus, she proposed they head to Border City and meet there after they separated. Lillian then invites Luca to leave the Empire with them, but he directly refuses. Luca leans against the wall, admitting his exhaustion with the entire situation. He reflects on the mistake of helping his companion, but now he must consider how to report the incident. Luca hopes the Belt Chief will take an interest in him to watch Quinuan, since neither of them is special. With this reasoning, he concludes his superior won't ask too many questions. The group finally arrives before a large, closed door at the end of the corridor. Turning to Ile, Luca warns him to be ready in case the device isn't there. Ile understands that if the teleportation device isn't present, it will be the end for them. As soon as the panel is activated, a strange sensation runs through Luca's body. Immediately, Luca's gaze sharpens as he tries to identify the source of that feeling. With the door opening, he concludes that the answer to what he feels is right ahead. He then closes his eyes, blocking his senses to focus entirely on the sensation. Luca detects a strong scent of fresh blood, oil, and iron coming from inside the room. Realizing there's no human presence, his eyes widen at what lies ahead. 4 Imperial guards in full armor, standing in the room, waiting for them. Faced with the scene, Luca understands their situation has reached a dead end. He knows he would already be at risk against a single guard, but now he must confront 4. The worst possibility is Lillian being captured alive, as she wouldn't withstand torture and would reveal everything. Luca realizes his dream of helping Ile have the life he always wanted was nothing but an illusion. He understands the only way out is to kill Lillian now to avoid suspicion, but attacking the Imperial guards would be a fatal mistake. Luca notices the soldiers watching them, knowing that hesitation would only raise more suspicion. Ile understands it's now or never to act. In a sudden movement, a single shot strikes Lillian in the head and she falls backward. With his hand still holding the gun, Ile watches her lifeless body hit the ground. One of the guards then questions Ile and Luca about why they only fired at that moment. Ile lowers his weapon and replies that he merely executed a hostage who was no longer useful. The guard leader demands a full report and asks why they brought the rebel there. The soldiers then turn and begin escorting Ile away from the room. Luca remains still, watching his friend being taken away by the Imperial troops. Later, in front of his captain, Luca is congratulated for his work as leader of the 21st Battalion. Next, Himelas details the report, praising Luca's leadership, but suggesting he work with Quinuan to improve team trust. The conversation then shifts to Lillian Ramones, with the captain wanting to know why she chose Luca to guide her. Luca explains that the plan, together with Ile, was to use Lillian as a hostage to steal the rebels' teleportation device. Even if it sounded logical, Himelas questions Luca about the strong bond he also had with Lillian. With his hands behind his back, Luca states that neither he nor Ile would be foolish enough to ruin the mission for personal reasons. He then confesses that the intention was to give Lillian a chance to survive if she helped them. With a sigh, the captain ends the conversation, dismissing Luca so he can rest. As Luca turns to leave, he is called again by his superior. Himelas then reveals that the Ramones family destroyed Ile's battalion with surprising efficiency. Seeing Luca's reaction, the captain clarifies that this information was already in the report and that the troops were caught off guard. After a moment, Luca replies that if he were in Ile's place, he would have anticipated the elimination of his own battalion, as he considers himself the best in the group. Hearing Luca's reply, Himelas smiles and says he will set great expectations for him. Aboard a fast train, the journey toward the capital continued under a starry sky. Inside the carriage, Luca fell asleep, reflecting on the exhausting days of the mission. His thoughts drifted to Ile, Lillian, and the border city, the place Lillian had dreamed of reaching. Soon, the image of Lillian's death resurfaced, executed by Ile, the man she had considered her hero. At that moment, Luca concluded that his own presence had forced Ile's hand, preventing Ile from fleeing with Lillian. Even while mourning for them, Luca clung to the fact that he had achieved his goal by saving Ile. Back in the capital, Luca and Ile were placed in recovery capsules to rest. As recognition, they were the only 2 among all the guards in training to receive the 7th-ranked Crossed Sword medal. Later, on a terrace overlooking the city, Luca met Ile and questioned the irony of receiving a Medal of Honor. Luca then admitted he had not expected Lillian's death, as he believed Ile would have fought the Imperial Guard for her. With his gaze lost on the horizon, Ile confirmed he would have tried if Luca hadn't been there. Ile then mentioned his family's happiness over the medal, despite their connection with the Romanis, and suggested that Luca give up his soldier's career. The suggestion made Luca reflect on the battalion Ile had sacrificed for love, leading Luca to consider giving up his career as well. Finally, Ile confessed that his family pressured him to become a guard and expressed that it would have been better if he had died in Lillian's place. Immediately after, Luca landed a quick, strong blow to Ile's stomach. While Ile complained about the pain, Luca admonished him to be careful with his words, reminding him that organs could be replaced. With that, Luca turned away, lamenting his own weakness. He then concluded aloud that even if he had been stronger, the outcome would have been the same. Ile then quietly asked Luca what he had done. Faced with the question, Luca remained silent. Observing Ile, Luca realized that Ile was not a killer, and that, even after everything, Ile couldn't save Lillian. With that certainty, Luca's hand opened and his medal fell, shattering into pieces on the ground. The scene confirmed that Luca did not belong to the Empire as ships crossed the city's sky. Next, Ile announced that he would go home for a few months, as it had been 4 years since he last returned. Before they parted, Luca asked about Lillian's escape. Ile revealed that she had been running away from an arranged marriage for money. Ile then detailed that the condition for the family's money was that Lillian would be raised as the deceased wife of the groom, unable to choose anything for herself. The revelation shocked Luca, who finally understood the abuse Lillian had suffered since birth, while Ile confirmed that Claude was the only one who had treated her with kindness. Luca finally understood that Commander Claude had been trying to introduce him to Lillian. Immediately after, Ile burst into laughter. Amidst his laughter, Ile revealed that he and Lillian had tricked Claude by claiming Luca was the centurion's son, and Ile expressed surprise that Claude had believed it. Ile then explained that the lie stuck because everyone knew how well Himelas treated him, in addition to Ile belonging to the Castoria family. With that, Ile revealed that Claude believed if Luca got Lillian pregnant, she would be free, leaving Luca perplexed by the plan. The conversation made Luca conclude that, although Ile was his friend, Ile was capable of deceiving and even killing his own subordinates to achieve his goals. Even after this realization, the trust Luca placed in Ile remained unshaken. Sometime later, Luca met Quinuan, who greeted him by calling him a war hero. Upon entering the room, the instructor congratulated Luca on the medal, even knowing that the visit was to watch him under the centurion's orders. Luca downplayed the importance of the medal, stating that it was only rank 7 and didn't compare to the instructor's deeds. He then mentioned that the centurion's chief had sent him to learn how to deal with subordinates, which amused Quinuan. The instructor then asked if Luca's men hadn't followed his orders, but Luca defended them, saying they were excellent. Then, with a smile, the instructor analyzed Luca's response and concluded that the problem was Luca being too soft. However, unfazed, Luca explained that he had preferred to take the risk alone rather than use his men, but that even so, they had been able to make it to the end. Nevertheless, Quinuan disagreed and warned Luca that by fighting on the front line, he overloaded his brain and used up resources that should have been spent protecting his subordinates. This raised the question of whether Luca should have used his companions. However, Quinuan stated that they should have chosen to sacrifice themselves, not been sent to their death. Quinuan then recalled how Luca had helped Gilda and Gabriel, stating that both would be happy to repay the favor. This seemed obvious to Luca. Quinuan then advised Luca that it was necessary to build bonds with subordinates, but at the same time maintain emotional distance so as not to hesitate to use them when necessary. Even so, Luca denied that he would do such a thing. This led Quinuan to say that's why he liked him, calling Luca a good boy. Continuing, Quinuan revealed his secret to keeping the upper hand in any human relationship. Be loved, but do not love in return. At that moment, Luca asked what to do if his mind could not handle the sacrifice of others because of guilt or conscience. Faced with the question, Quinuan was direct, advising Luca to get used to it, otherwise he would never be able to stand above others. Soon after, Luca stood up and declared that he would try to be better at sacrificing his men next time. With a satisfied smile, Quinuan approved Luca's answer, calling him a good boy once again. The next day, Luca waited alone on a transport platform. Under the open sky, he kept his gaze fixed straight ahead. Meanwhile, back in his room, Luca received an unexpected order from his captain to go to Krecha Academy. Himelas explained that it was tradition to send the best first, and that Ale had refused the offer to spend more time at home. Hearing this, Luca concluded that Ale still hadn't managed to overcome recent events. However, Captain Himelas warned Luca that he didn't understand noble society and couldn't continue like this if he wanted to be part of the Castoria family. Faced with the warning, Luca accepted the mission. Himelas then informed him that a guide would be sent, expressing confidence that Luca would enjoy the experience. The moment of departure finally arrived. As the conversation ended, a transport craft landed on the platform right in front of Luca. From inside the aircraft, the guide stared at Luca coldly and ordered him to get inside. Once inside, Luca found the guide seated, watching his arrival with arms crossed. But as Luca tried to introduce himself, he was cut off by a curt response rejecting formalities. Given her demeanor and tone, Luca wondered if he might be dealing with a noble of his own age. Soon after, he asked if she was indeed the guide sent by the captain, receiving a reply dripping with disdain. Without hesitation, Luca called her Miss of the Castoria family, visibly surprising her. Her first reaction was to ask how he had discovered her true identity. Luca then explained it was just a guess, since only someone from that family would so openly disdain Himelis's orders. Finally, Luca deduced she was the centurion's daughter, sent to prove the promise of adoption. A faint smile appeared as he imagined himself carrying that new surname. He then confronted the girl, stating that he knew who gave the order she was following. Introducing herself, the young woman revealed she was Giselle Castoria and warned Luca not to act like a knee pet. With his back to her, Luca began to apologize for the possible offense. However, in the middle of his apology, he stopped himself, remembering he hadn't endured so much just to bow to a noble. With a sigh, Luca leaned back in his seat and stated that the chief would understand his position. Right after, he proposed that they simply follow orders. Giselle guides, Luca obeys. He then asked if that was fine. Turning her face away, Giselle also leaned back in her seat, remaining silent. Moments later, the craft took off and flew across the sky of the futuristic city. Subsequently, the transport landed on a platform, and both disembarked in silence. Ahead, Giselle ordered Luca to follow her, as she would take him directly to his assigned dormitory. On the way, something caught Luca's attention. An imposing statue stood out along the path. At the base of the monument, an inscription greets Emperor Denocratia, the father of the nation. Looking upward, the newcomer finally realizes where he is. Before him stands Krathia Academy, a place he had only known from the news. Meanwhile, the pair's arrival draws curiosity from a group of students. As they walk, the others notice their uniforms and identify the newcomer as an Imperial guard. Suddenly, a white-haired student shoves another out of the way. The one shoved falls hard to the ground, right at the newcomer's feet. With a cold look, the white-haired student comments that it's a waste of a good implant. Then Giselle turns to the newcomer and asks why he's still standing there. Immediately after, she scolds him for not wearing colorful clothes, explaining that soldiers in training don't need such attire. From a distance, a couple watches as Giselle complains about following the academy's rules. Suddenly, a young man named Felix appears with a smile and a friendly wave. Felix approaches, expressing his happiness to see the newcomer, as he thought he wouldn't come without LA. Without delay, the newcomer introduces himself to Giselle and asks for a moment alone with his colleague. Promptly, she agrees to wait for him right there. As soon as Giselle steps away, Felix hugs the newcomer and whispers that the rumors about the centurion's fondness for him must be true. Felix then speculates that the captain might want to make the newcomer his son-in-law. However, the newcomer dismisses the idea as nonsense. The simple thought of becoming Himela's son-in-law makes him conclude it would be impossible, as the two wouldn't last a day together. Instead, he reveals that he already has an agreement to be adopted in exchange for keeping an eye on Quinuan during his stay. As they move away from the guide, Felix asks if any body modification has already been done. Next, an object marked 001 is discreetly placed in the newcomer's hand. The item resting in his palm leaves him visibly surprised at the unexpected discovery. Soon after, Felix says goodbye along with the group, commenting on the popularity of soldiers at the academy. Returning to Giselle's side, the newcomer concludes that the information obtained will be useful and will make coexistence easier. One of the revelations made was about the dormitory, identified by a symbol engraved on the wall. It was the space reserved for residents of the lower sectors and nobles in financial decline. However, the news does not discourage the newcomer, and his determined gaze remains unchanged in the face of reality. As he moves forward, he reflects that even here, a hierarchy exists, and that it wouldn't be any fun if things were easy. The two then enter the building for a full inspection. Inside the room, a robot presents the accommodations, which the newcomer describes as a true palace. With his hand resting on the table, he questions if this place truly houses commoners and bankrupt nobles. Finally, he throws himself into a chair, fully aware that he is in the best academy in the Empire. Standing before him, Giselle informs him that this will be his lodging. Soon after, she shares her personal number for emergencies, prompting him to question her apparent hostility. Her answer, stating she is just following orders, leads him to conclude that she takes responsibility for her role. As he watches her walk away, he comments that he will probably never call, to which she replies that this is to be expected. Before leaving, she pauses and offers one last direct piece of advice. The warning is to avoid getting involved with the leader of the dormitories, which immediately sparks his curiosity. Giselle then reveals that the girl is the most troubled in the entire academy, just as a female figure appears walking down the hallway. Alone in his room, the newcomer murmurs a question about the reason for such a warning. Right after, the sound of the doorbell interrupts him. His door opens, revealing a young woman. The woman introduces herself as Barbara, the dormitory leader, exactly the person Giselle had warned him about. In response, the Imperial Guard formally introduces himself as an Imperial Guard in training. Immediately, his cybernetic eye activates to analyze Barbara closely. As they exchange greetings, she observes him carefully, taking note of his simple clothing and the absence of a noble surname. Remembering Giselle's warning, he simply states that he has just arrived, brushing off the initial alert. As the conversation flows, Barbara learns he is from the lower sectors and expresses admiration for his achievement in becoming a guard. In return, he compliments her, noting that being dormitory leader is also a significant accomplishment. This brings a smile to her face. Watching her, he concludes that she too must have worked incredibly hard to reach her current position. The young woman then invites him to follow her, explaining that giving a tour of the dormitory is her duty as leader. He realizes that she had barely any free time between classes and her bath to come meet him. Watching her walk away, he recognizes her as someone highly efficient with her time. Later, at the imposing main building of the academy, he and Giselle become the center of attention in the main hall. They attract everyone's gaze. With a sharp look, Giselle silently studies her companion for a moment. She then informs him that, under her father's orders, they will be attending classes together for an entire week. Just then, a familiar voice calls out for Giselle. He turns to see Barbara approaching, offering Giselle a casual greeting. Without hesitation, the noble sharply orders Barbara to leave immediately. Shrinking back slightly, the dormitory leader replies that she only meant to say hello. Giselle turns away, firmly reinforcing that she has nothing to say to her. Giselle then hurries him along, reminding him that he cannot be late for his first class. Even as he is led away, he glances back at Barbara. Standing all alone, her withdrawn posture stands in stark contrast to the confident image of a dormitory leader. Facing forward again, he leaves the scene behind with a serious expression. When he asks about their strained relationship, Giselle simply replies that they entered the academy at the same time. Still confused, he recalls Giselle's earlier warning about Barbara as they walk down the hallway. Deciding to ignore the rumors for now, he refocuses on his ultimate goal of becoming a noble within the next 2 months. Later, while sitting on a hallway bench waiting for classes to begin, he idly spins an object in his hand to pass the time. Suddenly, another student confronts him directly, demanding to know his relationship with Miss Giselle. The student's defensive expression clearly betrays his romantic interest in the noblewoman. Deciding to mess with the boy, the guard quickly mocks him for his obvious crush, which instantly makes the student furious. In a flash, the guard grabs the student's wrist and twists it forward, drawing a sharp cry of pain. A moment later, he scolds himself for taking out his own frustrations on someone else and lets go. With teary eyes, the defeated student asks once more if he truly has no connection to Giselle. Now sitting together on the bench, the guard tries to ask a question, but the boy stubbornly asks why he should bother answering. Striking a deal, the guard offers to tell Giselle that the boy is a nice guy, in exchange for knowing the reason behind her intense hatred for Barbara. Opening up, the student explains that it wasn't always like this, claiming their rivalry is all due to a curse. He specifies that the curse belongs to Barbara, noting that dangerous incidents involving hacked androids always seem to happen around her. Although the guard doesn't believe it is her fault, the student insists that the strangest part is how Barbara constantly keeps seeking out new friendships despite the danger. He further reveals that Barbara only became dorm leader because no one else wanted the exhausting, work-heavy position. At that exact moment, the student points down the hallway toward Barbara, who is being approached by a group of classmates. Suddenly, one of the girls in the group pours a liquid directly over Barbara, soaking her clothes completely. The hostile group then surrounds her, while the girl who spilled the drink mockingly claims it was an accident. The same girl offers to wash Barbara's clothes, but Barbara politely refuses, saying she'll change in her room. Turning to her friends, the young woman mockingly asks if they heard her kindness being refused. With a threatening look, she insists that Barbara hand over the clothes immediately. Barbara's hands tremble as she clutches the fabric, unable to react to the intimidation. From their bench, the two watch the scene unfold. Luca realized something similar must have happened before, explaining why Barbara needed to shower the day they met. With his weapon in hand, Luca decides Barbara is lucky he's around. Fueled by his pent-up bad mood, he prepares to throw his daggers. With a swift strike, Luca hits the cup, making the girl scream in fright. Luca then orders orders her to stop the provocation, stating he makes no gender distinction in a fight. Faced with his direct threat, the girl and her friends retreat in fear. Luca positions himself between Barbara and the group, creating a protective barrier. Still surprised by Luca's intervention, the dorm leader calls his name softly. Luca partially turns toward her, maintaining his alert stance. With the situation now under control, Barbara finally manages to thank him for his help. With a smile, Luca wonders if his closeness to Barbara will now make him a target for the androids. The student then warns him that the girl's name is Kalisa Kano, and that he's messed with the wrong person. Even with the warning, Luca says he doesn't care if her family is powerful because nothing will happen to them. The student then reveals that the Kano family controls a gang in the lower sectors, and that they're probably already looking for Luca. Desperate, the student explains that the reason for the attack is that Kalisa's boyfriend was also affected by Barbara's curse. Luca simply processes the information in silence, absorbing what he's just heard. The two's conversation is interrupted by Giselle's arrival. She approaches with a look of disdain. Not missing the opportunity, Luca teases the student, suggesting he tell Giselle how he feels. The student steps back, stammering, saying he'd rather admire her from afar before asking Luca to speak well of him and fleeing. Seeing the scene, Giselle remarks that Luca has already made a friend. Luca then reveals the boy's name is Enrico Lacan. Giselle admits that Enrico gives her the creeps, feeling like he's always watching her from somewhere. At her response, Luca realizes it will be impossible to change Giselle's opinion of the boy. Further ahead, a teacher confronts Luca directly, asking if he really used a knife against a female student. Sitting in his chair, director guide Albern advises Luca to take it easy, acknowledging how suffocating the academy environment can be. Before director guide, Luca simply agrees with the warning he's received. The director compares Luca to a wolf among sheep. Luca replies that the problem is, the sheep don't act like they're going to be bitten. Guide explains that although the students may look like sheep, among them are monsters in sheep's clothing. The director adds to the warning, stating that these monsters are even more frightening than wolves. Returning Luca's weapon, Guide advises him to be careful, and Luca promises to remember the warning. As Luca walks away, he reflects that his real interest is not in the academy's monsters. His main focus is to uncover the truth about the witch's curse. The scene then shifts to a forest at night. Walking alone along the trail behind the gym, Luca prepares for what's to come. Aware that news about Barbara has already spread, he expects the curse's robots to come after him soon. His steps halt as he senses a presence approaching in the darkness of the forest. An unfamiliar voice questions Luca, asking if he is the newly arrived soldier named Luca. Moments later, a man steps in front of him, remarking that Luca was found by some low-level thug. Then the man and his companions inform Luca that Kalisa's actions are regarded as a rule of the Kano family. With a mocking smile, the thug provoked Luca, reminding him he was just an Imperial guard in training. Surrounded by the aggressors, Luca showed complete disinterest in the threat, asking if they truly thought they could beat him. Even so, the group's leader offered Luca a chance to apologize, but Luca responded with a counter-threat, warning them they could still leave with their organs intact. Unfazed, the thug prepared for the attack with a defiant expression. The attacker lunged with a powerful punch, and Luca acknowledged the technique was surprisingly good. As the punch drew near, the enemy dared Luca to dodge the blow, but Luca remained ready to respond. Suddenly, a patrol robot appeared, asking if anyone needed help. The machine's unexpected appearance caused panic among the thugs, who didn't understand why a patrol was there. With the robot's arrival, the leader decided to retreat, but promised to return and settle the score. The aggressors fled in a hurry, claiming they weren't crazy enough to fight a robot that continued offering assistance. Without hesitation, Luca dismissed the help and ordered the robot to leave. Unable to follow the command, the machine began to malfunction, repeating that such an action was impossible. As the robot glitched, the thug watched the scene, unable to make sense of what was happening. Suddenly, the patrol robot's eye glowed brightly, signaling a change in its behavior. With surprising speed, the machine launched itself at the thugs, taking down one of them. Another attacker shielded himself with his arms, now splattered with his companion's remains. The leader stepped back, glancing toward Luca. Immediately, the robot prepared for another attack, leaping toward its next target. The thug's expression twisted as the strike drew near. At the last moment, Luca intercepted with a powerful kick, sending the robot flying and stopping the assault. Shaken and on the ground, the thug shouted that Barbara's curse was real. Luca simply looked down at the thug, stating that an academy student shouldn't believe in curses. Immediately after, the machine charged directly toward Luca. Watching the robot, Luca realized it was operating at maximum output. From this, Luca concluded that the system had calculated it would need all its power for the fight. As the robot recovered, word, Luca understood that this wasn't just a simple mechanical malfunction. In fact, Luca realized the machine was being controlled by someone like a puppet. With a smile on his face, Luca prepared to finally have some fun with the fight about to begin. Next, Luca dodged to the side, avoiding a strike for a moment. At that moment, Luca noticed that the android's movement was clean despite being awkward, and wondered if the machine was running an advanced combat program. Even while facing multiple opponents, Luca found the challenge far too easy, and knew he needed something that would truly test him. Thus, Luca advanced and delivered a direct kick to the chest of one of the androids. During the fight, Luca identified a peculiarity in this opponent that set it apart from standard models. Faced with the threat, Luca simply taunted it, telling it to surpass his expectations and attack with everything it had. Then, Luca leaped onto the opponent's shoulders, stating that this wouldn't work like that. Using the momentum, Luca finished the android with a decisive blow, questioning how the machine expected to improve while getting distracted. With the opponent destroyed on the ground, a retreat request message emitted from its wreckage before it shut down. Seeing the last enemy fall, Luca lamented that the fight ended too soon, as it wasn't nearly enough for him. With the fight over, the group's leader quickly left the forest. Already far away, Luca simply commented that it was a pity. Then, security drones appeared in the sky, illuminating Luca's position with spotlights. Sometime later, Luca sat alone outside one of the academy buildings. After the incident, the security battalion requested Luca's cooperation to begin an investigation. In the interrogation room, investigator Gillian Campbell stated that the culprit was within the academy, and that everyone would be investigated. When asked about the possibility of the culprit being from the lower sectors, Campbell denied it, explaining that it was impossible to get past the firewalls. Luca then asked why, as only a soldier in training, he would be suitable for the investigation. The investigator replied that it was because of his ability to use archivictima. Noticing Luca's reaction, Campbell decided to tell him one more thing. The investigator revealed that users of that technique were monitored on a separate list, and that the answer lay with the person who taught it to him. At the mention, the image of Quinuan came to Luca's mind, leading him to question who his instructor really was. Right after, Giselle confronted Luca, asking what had happened and why he had accepted her father's orders, reminding him of the warning to stay away from Barbara. Without looking directly at her, Luca explained that he couldn't stand by while a defenseless person was being mistreated. With that, Giselle asked if he would do the same thing again, to which Luca confirmed he would have no other choice. She then proposed talking to Kalisa Kananov to make a deal, believing a conversation would resolve the situation. Hearing that, Luca observed her in silence, trying to understand why Giselle was so determined to solve that problem. Luca soon concluded that Giselle's confidence came from the certainty that she could control Kalisa. After that conclusion, Luca finally agreed and said they would talk to her. With a smile on his face, Luca added that he would prefer not to draw the chief's attention. Right after, Luca added that there was also something he wanted to check personally. In the meeting room, Kalisa Kananov was already defending herself, claiming that Barbara had hit her boyfriend first. Sitting across from her, Luca asked if she was sure she hadn't sent her boyfriend after Barbara on purpose. At the unexpected question, Kalisa froze for a moment. Pointing to the board, Luca explained that her boyfriend had used a Kanu family symbol to take revenge, just like they had tried to do with Luca. With everyone seated at the table, Luca asked directly if Kalisa needed an excuse to go after Barbara. Kalisa then stood up abruptly and shouted for Luca to shut up, denying she had done anything wrong. As soon as she protested, Giselle intervened and asked Kalisa to calm down. With a serious expression, Giselle cut the discussion short and firmly said that was enough. Next, Giselle asked if Kalisa was simply going to ignore what Luca had just said. Then she asked Luca to leave them alone for a few minutes, and he agreed before stepping out of the room. Outside, Luca confirmed his suspicion about Giselle's control and wondered why she hadn't stopped Kalisa from going after Barbara earlier. Luca considered it would have been easy for Giselle to do something during the 2 months she had been at the academy, instead of waiting for a forced deal. Shortly after, Giselle came out of the room and complained that she hadn't expected another scene from her rival, saying she thought Luca didn't want trouble. With that, Luca explained that he was only testing a theory about android control, and Giselle asked if he was acting like a detective. Luca replied that investigators were already handling the case. Seeing Giselle's reaction, Luca clarified that he was impressed she had silenced Kalisa with a single sentence. Giselle then explained that her family name carries weight in noble society, and that's why Kalisa couldn't ignore her words. Without hesitation, Luca asked if that was why Giselle had ordered Kalisa to harass Barbara. After Giselle asked what Luca was talking about, he replied that it wouldn't be unusual for someone who considered Barbara an important piece to use her resources as she wished. Annoyed by the accusation, Giselle grabbed Luca by the collar and told him to watch what he said. Without backing down, Luca provoked her with the question of whether her mechanical enhancements had affected her brain. With that, Giselle immediately released Luca, took a step back, and apologized. As she walked away, Giselle warned Luca to be ready for the consequences if he caused more trouble. Even suspecting Giselle was the prime suspect, Luca noticed there was something strange about the whole situation. Soon after, Luca noticed Giselle's hand trembling and wondered why she was acting that way. Watching her walk away down the hallway, Luca concluded that the Archivictima's reflexes only confused him even more. Later, Luca was sitting next to Barbara on a bench, while other students watched them from a distance. Suddenly, the girl approached and offered Luca a tray full of sandwiches, asking him to take them. Not understanding, Luca asked what she meant, and Barbara explained it was her way of thanking him for saving her from Kalisa. She then asked if she could keep making food for him, but Luca prepared to refuse, wanting to avoid misunderstandings. After Luca's implicit refusal, Barbara simply lowered her head and remained silent by his side. With her head still down, she quietly stated that she didn't care about any kind of misunderstanding. Hearing that, Luca wondered if she truly liked him, but he still felt that something was wrong. Luca then confronted her about the risks of continuing to talk to him, and Barbara simply replied that she didn't know what to do. To test her, Luca revealed that Kalisa had been bothering her because Giselle forced her to, and that Giselle wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. Faced with his surprise, Barbara simply confirmed that she knew very well about that situation. Luca then pressed her, asking if she knew the real reason why Giselle hated her so much. Immediately after, Barbara's expression changed completely as she asked what reason she would have to tell him that. Luca recalled the provocation he had made, wanting to see how Barbara would respond. As he questioned her, Luca remembered the strange feeling Barbara gave him the entire time. At that moment, the words of director Gid echoed in his mind, warning him about a wolf in sheep's clothing. From Barbara's reaction, Luca understood that the wolf in sheep's clothing was none other than Barbara herself. Back in his room, Luca reported through a communicator that he had met Kalisa's boyfriend. Through the hologram, investigator Campbell confirmed that Kalisa had purposely sent her ex-boyfriend after Barbara, praising Luca's judgment. With that confirmation, Luca understood that Kalisa had staged the situation just to have an excuse. When Luca asked if Campbell would use his authority to investigate a suspect, the investigator replied that it would be risky, as this was already the 6th case and someone had died. Given that, Campbell stated that his only intention was to catch the culprit who thought they could get away with it. Luca then suggested investigating Barbara, but Campbell dismissed the possibility, claiming it was impossible for a student from the lower sectors to control androids. Luca quickly countered that the same logic didn't apply to nobles, and Campbell agreed, explaining that they could interfere with android production. Before ending the call, Campbell mentioned he had one more piece of information that might help. The investigator then revealed that Barbara was sponsored by the Castoria family, leaving Luca in silence. After ending the communication, Luca admitted the information was useful and that he needed to think more about it. He reflected that the pieces of the puzzle seemed to fit, but something was still missing. Frustrated with the lack of progress, Luca decided he would try speaking directly with Giselle to get answers. Soon after, Luca moved to put his new plan into action. Observing a training field, he remembered what Alay had said about nobles needing to prove their worth to avoid being discarded. Next, Luca found Giselle in a workshop, noticing that she also had a very hard-working side. Luca then remembered how different and more hostile Giselle had been when they first met. As soon as she noticed his presence, Giselle asked him why he was there. Upon hearing that Luca just wanted to see her, Giselle spat out the water she was drinking. Giselle quickly told Luca to cut the jokes and say what he really wanted, as she was busy. Luca then asked her to stop lying, and when questioned, revealed that he had been officially invited to assist in the investigation. Unfazed, Giselle simply reminded Luca of her position as the daughter of the centurion chief. Luca then revealed that he knew her family sponsored Barbara, and asked if that was the reason Giselle wanted her out of the academy. With that, Giselle explained that she hated Barbara because of the curse, but when Luca confronted her about their friendship, Giselle tried to end the conversation. Luca stated that the security officers viewed the android incident as a clear case of malicious intent. Luca then pointed to Giselle as the prime suspect, which made her protest and claim that she had also been one of the victims. Unshaken, Luca replied that it was a common tactic for culprits to pose as victims, and that Giselle had all the tools for the crime. Seeing her reaction, Luca told Giselle to calm down and clarified that he wasn't directly suspecting her. Luca then asked her to tell him everything she knew, hoping to gain some insight. Just then, Barbara appeared in the hallway. She greeted him, explaining she had been looking for him and was worried when she couldn't find him in his usual spot. Luca immediately wondered how Barbara had located him, certain no one had been following him. He soon noticed her expression wasn't troubled at all. He then wondered how she had managed to stop him from getting the information in just 10 minutes. With that, he told Barbara to wipe that smile off her face as it was bothering him. Faced with the accusation, Barbara questioned his words. She then tried to justify herself, claiming she liked him for saving her from Kalisa. Before Barbara could continue talking about a misunderstanding, Luca hurled a chair, which shattered upon impact. Seeing the scene, Giselle asked Luca what he was doing. With a dark expression, Luca replied that until that moment, he had only wanted to kill time, but he was already tired of it. He then turned to Barbara, accusing her of making a fool out of him. Behind the debris, the woman remained crouched, calling out, "Barbara." In response, Luca's expression changed completely. He stated that Barbara had no idea what he was talking about. His gaze then swept around the room, leaving Giselle frozen for a moment. Luca then walked past Giselle and continued down the hallway. Turning to Luca, Giselle said she would leave the food there for him to enjoy later. She then turned and began to walk away, while Luca simply watched. Before Giselle could leave, Barbara came up from behind and grabbed her by the shoulder. With a smile, Barbara hugged Giselle and said it was good to see her again. Whispering something in Giselle's ear, Barbara let out a laugh. Before leaving, Barbara said goodbye, promising to see them around. As soon as Barbara left, Luca and Giselle were left alone in silence amidst the ruined room. Immediately, Giselle fell to her knees on the floor, while Luca remained standing beside her. Witnessing the scene, a sigh of realization escaped Luca. It proved everything, revealing the true culprit, the relationship between them, and the innocent party in the case. Approaching Giselle, Luca simply called her name, but she asked him not to ask anything else. Giselle then advised Luca to simply enjoy his time at the academy normally until the day he left. Amidst the wreckage around them, Giselle ended the conversation with a plea for him to stop. A call from Luca to Giselle then appeared on a holographic screen, but it went unanswered. Meanwhile, Luca recalled having reported the situation to the chief centurion, as Giselle had begun avoiding him after the incident. Even after the report, however, Himelas responded in an unexpected way, leaving the case entirely in Luca's hands to handle as he saw fit. This decision seemed strange, however, as the Imperial guards could resolve everything quickly, especially with Giselle herself involved. Despite being only a guard in training, Luca felt the immense weight of his responsibility. His duty to follow higher orders thus set him on a path of great pressure. Luca accepted the mission, fully aware of the high expectations placed upon him. In the present, the call was declined, and Luca reacted upon seeing the connection rejected. At that moment, suspicion fell on Barbara, but logic indicated it would be impossible for a student from the lower sectors to control the Academy's androids. Soon, the conversation revealed that nobles could interfere with androids, suggesting that Kalisa had used Barbara to locate and attack Giselle. While searching for another way to contact Giselle, Luca was surprised by a call from Enrico. Excited, Enrico ran toward Luca and asked if he had spoken well of him to Giselle. With a smile, Luca confirmed that he had, taking advantage of the opportunity that had presented itself. Shortly after, Giselle was clear with Enrico about her feelings. In their meeting, she told him she wasn't interested and admitted that his presence made her uncomfortable. Giselle then asked Enrico to stop following her, leaving him in tears with a bouquet of flowers in his hand. Luca simply watched Enrico run away from the place. After using Enrico for his own purposes, Luca promised himself that one day he would help him. With a new plan in mind, Luca then left his hiding spot. Soon after, Luca called out to Giselle Castoria, which made her confirm that she knew he was there. When Giselle threatened to report his behavior to her father, Luca interrupted her, saying it would do no good. He then revealed that he had already informed Tamilas about her involvement in the situation. Giselle indignantly questioned Luca, but he coldly replied that he had no reason to warn her. The answer made Giselle step back, completely unsettled by the news. She lamented that her reputation and position in the family had been ruined in seconds. Overcome with anger, Giselle grabbed Luca by the collar and yelled that it was all his fault for showing up. Calmly, Luca held her and offered help in exchange for the truth, but Giselle scoffed at the offer from a mere guard in training. To surprise her, Luca then asked what she would do if she knew that he would soon be part of the Castoria family. Faced with Giselle's surprise, Luca asked if she never thought it strange that someone like her was assigned as his guide at the academy. With that, he revealed himself to be a generational genius with a Medal of Honor, as well as having the support of the chief centurion. Luca then promised to help her regardless of the problems, leading Giselle to question the truth of that offer. Thus, Luca explained that by solving the case, his chances of receiving more support from the chief centurion would increase, allowing them both to grow together. With that, Giselle came closer and finally admitted that she was the one controlling the androids and who created Barbara's curse. Both sat down as Giselle began to tell the story. The narrative began by revealing that Barbara was not just an acquaintance, but someone Giselle trusted. It all began 3 years ago, when Giselle's curiosity about who her family was sponsoring led her to meet Barbara, who seemed nice and skilled. According to Giselle, the problem began out of jealousy when a boy approached Barbara, who was popular for her personality. Out of immaturity and fear of losing Barbara's company, Giselle decided to use a robot disguised as an android just to scare the boy. Giselle then continued her explanation, detailing that she had placed a recording in the robot. It was programmed to tell the boy to stay away from Barbara and follow it at night. However, the prank had serious consequences. The boy injured his head, left the academy because of the trauma, and Giselle disposed of the robot out of fear. Since the incident had caused an injury, Giselle ended up being investigated. Barbara, who had seen Giselle tampering with the robots, discovered everything. It was then that Barbara suggested Giselle pose as a victim to divert suspicion, and Giselle used her right to repair androids to install a chip given to her. Without understanding why, the android went berserk and attacked Giselle, making her the second victim of the incident. From that moment on, the curse truly began, and Barbara's behavior also changed. Soon after, Barbara began making strange requests, demanding that Giselle keep her distance and claiming Barbara needed more victims. With that revelation, Giselle ended up deceived and trapped in a situation that became impossible to resolve on her own. Thus, Giselle was completely in Barbara's hands with no way to escape. Suddenly, a visual interference appeared with the image of Barbara, who repeatedly asked if Giselle had told their secret to a boy. Barbara's voice called Giselle a traitor, making her react in pain. The big question was how Barbara managed to hack into Giselle's personal device, which should have had maximum security. As a strange noise intensified, it became clear that the sound wasn't coming from Giselle's device, and that they needed to get out of there immediately. The mechanical sound turned out to be from a nearby attack device activating. A shot was suddenly fired, hitting Luca squarely and throwing them both back from the impact. Hidden behind a pillar, Luca tried to catch his breath after the surprise attack. Luca then moved toward the young woman, who remained unconscious on the ground. Tearing off a piece of his shirt, he quickly tied it around his wound to stop the bleeding. The shot had come from an attack drone, and Luca knew a direct confrontation would only worsen his injury. To make matters worse, the only weapon Luca was carrying was a pocket knife. The silence of the area suggested no one else had noticed the incident. Suddenly, his expression hardened, revealing his resolve to retaliate directly against Barbara. Soon, Luca realized that Giselle had woken up. She asked if the shot hurt, and Luca, with a grimace, confirmed that it certainly did. Just then, a burst of gunfire erupted, forcing them to scramble for cover behind a pillar. Hidden, Luca lamented not knowing the drone's exact location to counterattack. However, a new idea suddenly struck him. He called out to Giselle, who answered immediately, and then asked her for a mirror. In the mirror's reflection, the attack drone finally revealed itself. As soon as Luca spotted it, he hurled his knife toward the target. On impact, a large explosion ripped through the drone, sending him flying backward. Suddenly, Luca's communicator activated on its own, leaving him confused. Through the device, he tried to call Giselle, who was only a few meters away. Giselle also tried to use her communicator, but reported she couldn't operate anything. Barbara's voice echoed through the communicator, questioning Giselle for betraying her after Barbara had done everything to protect her. As Barbara's voice mentioned Luca, Giselle's wrist was suddenly gripped tightly. With a hard squeeze, Luca shut off the communicator, declaring there was no need to keep listening to that lunatic. Luca then held Giselle in his arms, stating they needed to get to a safe place first. As Luca moved away with Giselle, Felix spoke into the communicator, confirming he had just arrived at the location. Upon meeting Felix, Luca asked about the orders, but his new ally explained he hadn't been informed about the operation. Giselle was surprised by the conversation. She asked if her father was behind the decisions, and Felix confirmed it. The confirmation left her speechless, as she concluded she had been abandoned by him. As Giselle grew desperate, Luca, the guard, thought about not jumping to conclusions. Even as the chief's daughter, Giselle was still a civilian, and special treatment could jeopardize the mission. Turning to Felix, the conversation continued while Giselle, the noblewoman, remained silent. Felix pointed to Luca's arm and asked if it hurt, but Luca downplayed the injury. With a smile, Felix concluded that if the wound wasn't a problem, they could keep going. He then asked if Luca could move at standard speed, and Luca replied there was no reason to worry. As soon as Felix reported his location through the communicator, stating he was with both of them, an unexpected shot struck him, tearing off his mechanical arm on impact. Quickly, they scrambled for cover to avoid another shot. With his weapon in hand, Luca realized the shots came from very close by, but he couldn't detect any presence. The situation felt strange, as if the royal guards themselves had fired. Felix questioned Barbara's ability. Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice spoke up, proposing a conversation. Luca was surprised to recognize the shooter. The voice continued, revealing that if the shooter had aimed at Felix's head, he might not have survived the attack. Luca asked him if he had any idea who he was talking to. The shooter replied that he knew they were just guards in training, and having no time to waste, he would get straight to the point. The order was clear and direct. He wanted them to hand over Giselle Castoria. Luca understood this as a ransom kidnapping, but the attacker explained that his princess wanted the woman. The threat becomes personal, and the mention of Giselle makes Luca realize that Felix has been attacked again. Giselle looks at Luca, completely paralyzed by the assault. The scene before him leaves Luca frozen in surprise. The shooter, cloaked in camouflage, lifts Felix by the neck, incapacitating him in midair. Soon the adversary fully emerges, wearing a combat suit that completely conceals his identity. Luca then notices a targeting system, focused on the path ahead, emanating from the enemy. The enemy's fully camouflaged combat suit had made him undetectable until now. Facing the immediate threat, Giselle grips Luca's hand firmly, acutely aware of the danger. Luca then steps in front of Giselle, telling her he'll buy her time and instructing her to run as fast as she can on his signal. Giselle tries to protest the escape plan. However, with no time to argue, Luca holds her firmly and orders her to follow his instructions. After a quick countdown, they both prepare to act at the precise moment. At Luca's signal, Giselle sprints away while he stays behind. Luca immediately takes aim with his weapon, covering Giselle as she moves swiftly into the background. Moments later, Luca's shots whiz past the enemy. As Luca fires another shot, he realizes his opponent possesses incredibly fast reflexes. The adversary then reveals he doesn't want to kill two freshmen. Confused, Luca questions the term freshman, wondering if they aren't actually older. With a swift motion, the figure warns Luca to pay attention if he doesn't want to die. As Luca defends himself, the cadet concludes that his opponent is no ordinary fighter, but a royal guard. The attacker then reveals that his real target is Giselle, and he plans to deal with Luca first. Thrown back by the force of the attack, Luca realizes that if the fight continues like this, defeat will be inevitable. Still falling, he desperately tries to find a quick solution. From this new vantage point, Luca quickly analyzes his opponent and drafts a new attack strategy. His analysis spots a glint of metal, a knife, which makes him wonder if it belongs to Felix. Luca quickly tosses his pistol, aiming it to strike the knife on the ground. He then snatches the knife, gripping it firmly, and moves in for a counterattack. With a swift strike, Luca's blade advances, clashing sharply with the opponent's guard. Surprised to have been hit, the guard asks Luca if he's an RC's combat arts user. The adversary then dodges Luca's consecutive attacks, swiftly creating distance between them. After stepping back, the opponent acknowledges Luca's skill, stating he'll finish with one last lesson. He then remarks that although they've only played around a little, things have already gotten complicated. Noticing the sudden change in the enemy's demeanor, Luca tightens his grip on his blade, remaining on guard. Wounded, Luca wonders about the opponent's hesitation and Giselle's safety. Realizing his difficulty in focusing, he knows he needs to end the fight quickly. The guard then warns him to step aside and not throw his life away like that. Luca takes a deep breath, thinking his opponent must find all of this amusing. With a clearer mind, he decides that his wound and the enemy's identity no longer matter. With that, Luca raises his blade, channeling his energy for a new, decisive strike. Luca then delivers a blow that accomplishes nothing. As Luca attacks, the opponent praises his training and asks if he wants to dedicate his life to the Empire. The attacker then looks Luca in the eye and asks if he truly thinks he can't be killed. Luca responds, "The Empire is one thing." Blocking another strike with his blade, which he had planted in the ground, Luca adds, "Your attitude, however, is another matter entirely, and it's starting to annoy me." Hearing this, the adversary begins to laugh. The adversary remarks, "Such a rebellious spirit is not well regarded in the Empire." He then introduces himself as Rick Kaiser, a Republican. With blood dripping, Luca asks, "Are you a traitor?" Rick, however, suggests, "Resistance fighters is a more appropriate term." Luca then smirks and says, "You're barking too much." Rick replies, "This is far more than a bark." With that, Rick begins to float in the air, surrounded by his energy. He then charges forward at high speed, attacking Luca. Luca, using his bare hands, manages to intercept Rick's advance. From the force of the impact, Luca's armored hand begins to shatter. In a renewed charge, Rick attacks again, destroying Luca's other arm. Rick manages to grab Luca by the neck, saying, "This is your last chance to beg for your life." Despite being immobilized, Luca flashes a defiant smile. smile. With that, Rick lifts Luca into the air with a single hand. Even in such a critical moment, Luca defiantly speaks his mind. After hearing him out, Rick says, "If you survive, give my regards to Quinuan." The last thing Luca registers is the sickening sound of his own neck breaking. The scene then shifts to the Imperial Capital Army Hospital. Inside, Felix wakes up in a bed, calling for Luca and complaining of pain. Sitting beside Felix, Luca replies, "Of course it's going to hurt if you try to talk, especially with your neck." Luca explains that Felix's brain was severely damaged because his neck was broken for too long, yet he considers Felix lucky. Luca then recalls that Giselle arrived with 4 other guards, and without her quick action, he too would have been in critical condition. Himeles then approaches, asking Luca to remain calm and not get up. Himeles then sits beside the bed to hear his subordinates report. Luca reports that Felix fulfilled his duty and fought to the very end. He then prepares to give the full account of events. After recounting the fight, Luca concludes his report, saying, "That's all." Himeles then reveals that Rick Kaiser's real name is Rick Silva, one of the Empire's most wanted criminals. Surprised, Luca hears Himeles explain that not all criminals are made public, especially when corruption is involved. Luca then asks, "What do you mean by corruption in a supposedly perfect empire?" Realizing that Rick was not the only traitor, Himeles decides to tell Luca all the details of the mission. He reveals Operation Juliet, a 5-year plan to get close to the leadership of the anti-empire group known as Nemesis. While Himeles explains that Nemesis is too organized for conventional methods, Luca asks, "Did the operation fail because I didn't capture Rick?" Even without fully understanding, Luca hears Himeles reveal that the plan succeeded because they managed to infiltrate allies into the very heart of Nemesis. Soon after, Luca learns that Barbara is their ally, recruited by the group as a hacker. Hearing that Barbara had been preparing for this for a long time to get their attention, Luca clenches his fist in silence. With that, Luca concludes that all the sacrifices, from Felix's damaged brain to the abuse Giselle suffered, were nothing but disposable pieces. When Luca asks if Giselle knows, Himeles says no and insists it's better she remains unaware. Himeles then asks Luca if he knows why he's telling him all of this. With the word disposable echoing in his mind, Luca wonders if he too will be discarded in such a miserable way without having achieved anything. As a digital panel appears in front of Luca, he is ordered to read and sign the document. The young man remains silent for a moment. Himeles then welcomes him to the Castoria family, while the panel reveals it to be an adoption declaration in his name. In the hospital room, Luca sits by the bed while Felix remains unconscious. Nearby, the used treatment needles lay dirty. Some time ago, Himeles had explained that the documents would take time to be validated. A new implant had been installed in Luca's spine, and after its removal, he was warned he would feel pain and discomfort for a while. Lying in bed, Felix calls to Luca just as he is about to leave the room. Without turning around, the cadet simply confirms with a gesture to his neck that he is already on his way out. With a final good luck, Luca turns and walks toward the exit. Now in the training center, Luca walks down a corridor while other students watch him. As he passes, he notices a panel displaying Barbara, the witch. Even without fully understanding, he continues to process the fact that she was an infiltrated spy and his nemesis. Luca then recalls the way the girl acted, which did not seem to be just an act. With that, he stops for a moment and gazes outside through the window. At that instant, he begins to wonder if his past in the orphanage and his meeting with Quinuan were mere coincidence. He then reflects on the events at the academy, questioning if he was really acting by his own choices. Even with these thoughts, he decides he did not climb out of the pit solely through his own effort. With a determined step, he pushes those doubts aside, saying he does not need to think about it. As he moves away from the window, Luca concludes that it is all fantasy and that the captain's information was a loyalty test. With his mechanical hand clenched, he decides he will not let this chance slip away. Standing before a door, he reinforces to himself that this is a unique opportunity to change his life. As soon as the door opens, Quinuan greets Luca and asks how his stay at the academy was. While the instructor serves tea, Luca replies that it was so much fun he almost did not come back. Quinuan expresses regret about what happened to Felix. As Luca sits down, he hears that his friend was an excellent recruit and receives a cup of tea. The young man stares at the drink for a moment, questioning the instructor's sincerity. Luca then informs Quinuan that Rick asked him to say hello and let him know he was fine. After sipping his tea, Quinuan identifies Rick Silva Nunez and says he never imagined Rick would become a traitor. The cadet notes that the two seemed close, and Quinuan confirms they were colleagues, praising Rick's reflexes. When asked, Quinuan states that he would never have contact with a terrorist. Luca concludes he cannot report this to the captain. He explains that since it was something that could put his life at risk, he decided to speak to Quinuan first. With that, the instructor asks Luca why he cares so much about Rick. Without answering directly, Luca asks what the Archy's combat arts are. Quinuan then wants to know the reason for Luca's curiosity. Next, Luca reveals that the Empire keeps a separate list for users of the technique, and that this was why Rick let him live. The instructor remains silent for a moment, sipping his tea. Soon, Quinuan praises Luca for being clever and calls him Luca Castoria. Quinuan approaches and says the cadet knows too much for someone of his background. The young man replies that he understands perfectly well what that means. With that, the instructor begins explaining that 200 years ago, there was the first rebellion in the Empire's history. The rebellion was led by an immigrant advisor named Noel Muliska, who contributed combat strategies to the Empire. Judging direct confrontation impossible, Noel decided to face the Empire using intelligence. Thus, the Archy Victima technique was born from this strategy. Quinuan then corrects the name to Archy's combat arts. Hearing the story, Luca processed the fact that the technique he learned originated from a traitor. Quinuan concluded that with this skill, Noel and his allies managed to resist the Empire, continuing to select people suitable for its use. Luca then recognized that the technique was indeed useful in combat, especially when no other options were available. Luca then deduced that the style was created for fighters who needed an adaptable method, as they weren't soldiers, and Quinuan confirmed his analysis. The instructor continued, revealing that even during a large-scale Imperial operation, Noel and his allies managed to escape alive. Thus, they spread throughout all Imperial territories, recruiting disposable soldiers and attacking outposts. This way, it didn't matter if they were caught, as they only needed to cut off the tail to ensure the main group's escape. Luca stated he could imagine it, since without distinctive combat gear, the traitors would have no trouble blending in with civilians. Even without such gear, they could still fight using Archy's combat arts and escape easily if caught. At that moment, Luca finally understood why Rick gave him a chance to survive, and why the Empire kept a separate list for users of the technique. When Luca asked how the Empire managed to locate the traitors, Quinuan interrupted, stating that all suspects were killed. Quinuan then revealed that there was no time to distinguish between civilians and traitors. Some areas were completely purged to wipe them out, and thus the rebellion was finally contained, even though some Archy's combat arts users did not escape. When asked if this was the Empire's secret history, Quinuan explained that they didn't hide it, but they also didn't openly tell it. Thus, the three key points of this secret history were the betrayal of Noel Muliska, the massacre that followed to contain the rebellion, and the fact that Quinuan, the Imperial Guard instructor, had mastered the technique. Luca then asked if the reason the captain took him to Quinuan was because the captain suspected Luca had ties to the traitors. Congratulating Luca, Quinuan confirmed the young man's suspicion, and then challenged him to present any evidence linking Luca to Nemesis. Quinuan then promised credit for giving Luca one last chance to breathe if such evidence existed. Even without understanding Quinuan's attitude, Luca stated he didn't believe the instructor had any connection to them. Quinuan then warned Luca that the captain thought differently and advised him to investigate Quinuan's marks in the lower sectors. With that, Quinuan assured Luca that it would definitely help. Luca then began to question how much the captain already knew when sending him to speak with Quinuan. As Luca prepared to leave, he stated that he would report what he heard to the centurion captain. As the door opened, Quinuan bid the young man farewell. Luca then walked alone across a walkway at sunset. The scene pulled back, revealing the vast Imperial city at dusk. Luca then stopped at the edge of a building, gazing at the horizon. With a frustrated look, Luca concluded that they seemed to be merely mocking his situation. He saw himself as nothing more than a chess piece in the struggle between the two, questioning whether he would survive in the middle of the crossfire. With that, Luca admitted it was becoming harder and harder to read Quinuan, and that he wanted to find out who Quinuan really was. After unsuccessfully searching for information about Noel Muliska, Luca decided he couldn't keep sinking like this. He concluded that his only option was to follow Quinuan's advice. Next, Luca decided to search for traces of Quinuan in the lower sectors of the city. Thus, Luca recalled Himalas's order to watch Quinuan, a suspected traitor who continued to act freely. That's why Quinuan, the suspect, advised Luca to investigate the marks Quinuan had left in the lower sectors, assuring Luca it would help. In this way, Luca realized that following the advice would take him straight into the dangerous lower sectors where Nemesis operated. So, the situation presented itself as a possible loyalty test, a move between the Empire and Quinuan to prove Luca. Even without being able to turn back, Luca decided to prepare to follow the trail left behind. Meanwhile, Luca understood that getting out of there would require the utmost caution and wouldn't be easy at all. Soon after, Luca presented himself to Himalas to report everything, stating that he had been provoked by his target. In the commander's presence, Luca exposed the connection between Quinuan and Rick Kaiser, questioning why they let such a suspect act freely. Faced with this, Luca stated that he would continue to obey, even if he wasn't allowed to know the whole truth. After a moment, Himeles looks Luca directly in the eye and declares his trust. Himeles then reveals that the order to investigate Luca came from above, believing that Luca is the key to Nemesis. At that moment, Luca questions why they keep such a dangerous man as an instructor. Himeles explains that it is the only way to keep Quinuan close. In response, Himeles asks if that clears things up for Luca. Still in the room, Luca remarks that even after all this time, Quinuan's self-control has not allowed for any opening. Himeles encourages Luca to continue, revealing that many soldiers have failed this task, but Luca is the only one who has made progress. Himeles then adds that Quinuan, the instructor, also likes Luca. Taking advantage of the moment, Luca makes a request that goes beyond his rights as a soldier in training. Shortly after, a transport capsule descends from the sky at high speed. Inside, Himeles and Luca sit facing each other during the trip. As they descend, Himeles asks Luca if he is nervous. Honestly, Luca admits he would be lying if he said no. During the ride, Luca recalls the request he made to Himeles. As a result, Luca received a free pass to move between the upper and lower sectors. In addition, Luca obtained authorization to carry a weapon and access funds for the investigation. Luca's authorization also granted him access to restricted information available only to superiors. Despite all this support, the situation remains dangerous, requiring Luca to do everything he can to succeed. Still in the capsule, Luca confesses to Himeles that he fears being killed for knowing more than he should. Sincerely, Himeles confirms that if the superiors decided to cover up the case, Luca would be one of those eliminated. Even so, Himeles promises to do everything he can, using his authority, to protect Luca. Right after, Himeles hands over a family card that projects an authorization seal. With that, Luca recognizes that his life is now in the commander's hands, admitting that he is not a traditional person. At that moment, Himeles instructs Luca to greet his new family, and Luca offers to act in a specific way. The answer is simple: just be himself to serve as motivation for Himeles' children. However, the word motivation leaves Luca uncertain about the real intent behind the request. Even without being able to imagine what Himeles is planning, Luca accepts that he must follow the rules to ensure his protection. As they approach their destination, Luca is told they are almost there. The transport capsule then accelerates its descent toward a large building. Observing the place, Himeles admits that even for him it is hard to like a place like that. Upon arrival, Himeles reveals that he grew up in that very place. Then, the capsule lands safely on the arrival platform. Soon after, Himeles and Luca enter a luxurious and richly decorated hall. At that point, Himeles advises Luca to rest first, explaining that the formal introductions will happen later. From the upstairs window, Luca observes a group of people gathered in the hall. Meanwhile, Himeles stands at the center of the crowd, receiving everyone's attention. Luca comments that the dynamic is not much different from the lower sectors, while questioning if this is the life he had always dreamed of. Suddenly, a sound coming from the bedroom door makes Luca turn in that direction. It is Giselle who appears, stating that Luca truly has become a Castoria. In front of Luca, Giselle apologizes for how she acted earlier, calling her behavior unacceptable for the family. Calmly, Luca responds that it was normal for a civilian to react that way, given the whole situation. She then reveals that she also visited Felix, and that even Felix did not recognize her. Luca tells her she does not need to feel guilty, since Felix was only doing his duty, and denies that he is trying to comfort her. With a smile, Giselle compares him to a flame that burns brighter than any other. Following this, she asks if he remembers what she had said about helping him if he entered the family. He quickly confirms his promise, approvingly noting that this is how an Imperial noble should act when claiming what is rightfully his. As she steps back, the young woman offers to give him some information as payment. Giselle then activates a holographic panel, commenting that her father isn't one to lend a hand easily. An image of the brothers is then projected, and she advises him to be careful with them. She explains that his arrival puts pressure on the others. The Castoria family is a lineage of soldiers, but unlike him, the other potential successors have flaws. As an elite soldier, the newcomer represents a significant threat to them. He quickly agrees that it makes sense for the brothers to feel threatened by the possibility of losing their position to someone like him. Unexpectedly, he directly questions her about her own position, and her expression shifts for a moment. He then asks if she has no interest in becoming the next head of the family, but she avoids answering directly. The heiress states that she doesn't want to get involved in the fight, but she won't stand idly by if provoked. She warns that he cannot afford to wait either. With that, she advises him to seize opportunities when they arise. The soldier then smiles, offering her the same advice as her new brother. Giselle slightly opens her mouth in surprise. Immediately after, she bursts into loud laughter at his unexpected response. Once she composes herself, she asks if she can count on his support should her day come. With a smile, he confirms his support, support as long as he is not harmed in the process. She then extends her hand for a handshake, treating him as an ally and wishing good luck to her new brother. She then warns that this will be the first and last time she calls him that. He agrees, replying that it would be strange to hear her speak like that. Suddenly, bells ring in the background, announcing dinner. Before the family crest, the two face each other, their alliance newly formed. In a large dining hall, the other family members are already seated at the table. The doors open, and the new member enters the hall, accompanied by the head's daughter. Seated at the table are the second son, Joel, the firstborn, Nicholas, and the head's wife, Eva Castoria. The matriarch then addresses the newcomer, welcoming him and stating that she has already heard much about him. The young man's expression remains serious as he stares at the woman who leads the family. Finally, Eva asks everyone to sit, as her husband will arrive shortly. Giselle nods in agreement. Before taking his seat, Giselle discreetly whispers to him not to let her mother provoke him, as their father will not protect him from internal conflicts. With that, Himelas enters the room, and everyone at the table falls silent to receive him. The head of the house simply announces for everyone to begin eating. Before eating, Himelas opens dinner with a formal greeting to the protector of humanity. He then concludes the greeting by thanking the empire's first emperor. Soon, everyone else at the table also begins the meal. While eating, the young man observes the family's behavior. He then realizes he is drawing everyone's attention at the table. The scene then shifts back to a few minutes earlier, when he and Giselle were still in the hallway. At that moment, Giselle was explaining that the brothers feeling pressured indicated their ambition for leadership. She then confirms that the two have probably already read all available information about the new member. She reveals that Nicholas became a bureaucrat with many allies due to his lack of aptitude for combat. As for Joel, even though he is less skilled, he has a better chance of becoming the successor because he is a soldier supported by their relatives. Finally, Eva warned Luca to be careful, because the brothers would try to provoke him for any reason. Back in the present, Luca understood why Nicholas and Joel were watching him so closely. As Luca served himself, he recalled the advice he had received on how to act. Luca then began cutting his piece of meat in silence. Looking at the table, Luca noticed that Himelas was not eating. Himelas, the head of the house, finally brought his fork to his mouth, declaring that he needed to surpass his father's expectations. Meanwhile, Eva, the commander's daughter, ate her meal in silence under the watchful eyes of the maids. Immediately after, Luca also ate his piece of meat with intensity. With a smile, Joel broke the silence and called Luca's name. Hearing the call, Luca stopped eating and stared at Joel, waiting to hear what he wanted. Joel then reprimanded Luca, saying he hadn't wanted to discuss such matters at their first meeting. With that, Joel criticized Luca's lack of etiquette, questioning how someone could have lived until now without knowing the basics. While being criticized, Luca analyzed Joel's behavior and the quietness of Nicholas, the eldest son, at the table. From his observation, Luca concluded that Nicholas was the only one he truly needed to be careful with. Joel continued his provocation, asking whether someone who had never received a medal in 10 years deserved the family name. With the provocation hanging in the air, Luca observed the table while considering the Castoria family's reputation. In response, Luca leaned forward and stared directly at Joel. Luca then challenged Joel to test his combat skills, which he had learned from an excellent captain, instead of worrying about etiquette. At the challenge, Joel reacted with surprise, gripping the handle of his knife tightly. At that moment, Himelas intervened in the discussion, ordering both Luca and Joel to stop immediately. In his defense, Joel, the second son, claimed that he was only giving an example to Luca, the new brother. Himelas then reprimanded Joel, asking if he hadn't realized that Luca already knew proper etiquette. Himelas soon revealed that Luca had only pretended not to know, and questioned Luca directly to confirm. Instead of answering, Luca simply ate the piece of meat on his fork. After eating, Luca responded with a smile, saying he had merely made a mistake. With that, Luca justified himself by saying he had gotten nervous because it was his first time in a place like that. Luca's answer caused a visible reaction on Joel's face. Soon after, Nicholas joined the conversation, mentioning the 7th-ranked crossed sword medal that Luca, the new brother, had received. Nicholas then admitted he felt bad for not having become a soldier, but expressed happiness that his father had found someone like Luca. With that, Joel, the second son, questioned Nicholas, taking the statement as criticism about not being a good soldier. Calmly, Nicholas, the eldest, defended himself, saying he had been misunderstood and that he was sure Joel would achieve great things in the future. Taking the opportunity, Luca also said that he had felt bad over a similar situation. Luca then explained that his superiors had felt pressured and avoided sending him into battle because of his father. The discussion continued, and the tension between the brothers grew in front of everyone at the table. With each exchanged word, the family's conflicts became more evident, like old old scars. Even so, Luca was certain that this scene was exactly what Himelas had expected of him. As his new father, Luca understood that behind that serious expression, Himelas, the commander, was satisfied inside. Thanks to Ava's intervention, the conflict between the brothers ended, and dinner gave way to a peaceful banquet. During the event, Ava, the matriarch, formally introduced Luca to the guests as the new member of the family, Lucas Castoria. With that, some people came to speak to Luca, already aware that he was not easy to deal with after the discussion with Joel. After reviewing some information with Giselle, Luca's first day as part of the Castoria family finally came to an end. Back in his room, a sudden realization put Luca on alert. Soon, the silhouette of a man materialized at the bedroom door. Approaching the bed, Himelas asked if Luca was awake. The veteran then apologized for the late hour, but warned Luca that he needed to maintain a neutral position within the family. As Himelas spoke, the head of the house sat in an armchair with a glass in his hand. Luca expressed his surprise, remembering that alcohol negatively affected the nervous system used in combat. Himelas offered the drink, but the young man refused, stating that learning Archi's Victima was already enough. Finally, the commander advised Luca as a veteran, explaining that one needed a bit of impurity to endure for so long in that place. At that moment, Luca questioned Himelas about the necessity of humanity, since Himelas had called it the key to humanity's box. A drop of sweat ran down Luca's face, as he remembered that those who thought like that were the first to be devoured by the Legion. When Luca suggested Himelas was drunk, Himelas asked him to consider his advice a gift for becoming family. As Himelas stood up, the head of the family reminded Luca that this was not a battlefield, and that he should find a hobby. Shortly after, Himelas placed a hand on Luca's shoulder. With the advice given, Himelas turned and left the room. Alone, Luca wondered how he could pursue impurities, when it was already so hard to focus on improvements. He asked himself if the commander wanted him to be like Quinuan, even though he knew that irregularities could be caused by emotions. After standing up, Luca questioned how the head of the centurion could say such things to him. The visit, with its advice about impurity, revealed a side of Himelas he had never seen before. Luca concluded that he had received a senseless piece of advice, as if Himelas were acting like a normal father. On the second day at the Castoria house, Luca accompanied Giselle on a tour of the property, while focused on his own plans. Soon, Giselle stopped in front of a door, activated the panel, and announced their arrival. As the door opened, a bright light illuminated Luca's face. Before Luca, a huge arsenal was revealed, occupying an entire building. Luca asked if Giselle was responsible for the place, and Giselle simply replied, mentioning her studies in engineering. She then explained that the care of the armaments was a tradition among the women of the family, with her mother in command and herself as the designated successor. As they walked, Luca commented that Giselle didn't seem like the type to like grease, but then heard about the matriarch's skill. Luca listened silently, as Giselle reaffirmed that all of it was an old family tradition. She added that the arsenal demonstrated the true strength of the Castoria family. When Giselle called Luca, he was already standing further ahead, observing something under a beam of light. His attention was focused on an imposing combat robot, which stood out in the room. As Luca approached, he noticed that the machine's body bore traces of various repairs. Soon after, Luca realized that the right arm was larger than the left, probably modified to hold a special weapon. Giselle then approached and asked if that was what had captured his attention. She then revealed it was the Scylla armor, a bodily relic from an ancestor of the Castoria family. She added that, although today it was considered inferior to a myrmidon, the armor remained a unique treasure to them. The sight of that combat robot remained etched in Luca's mind. Later, while walking with Himelas, Luca asked why the elders lived so far away. Himelas explained that elders were only advisors, and the head of the family could not be a puppet. Soon after, Himelas announced that they had arrived at their destination. The two stopped in front of the imposing structure of the Silver Palace. Upon entering, Himelas explained that there were 7 elders in total, and that surviving to become one already proved their worth. Next, Luca wanted to know how many elders were against his adoption. Himelas revealed that 2 were against it, 4 remained silent, and only 1 was in favor. Himelas stated that most of his decisions were approved, and asked Luca not to mind the opposition. Himelas only commented that the structure was more resistant than it seemed. Along the long corridor, both continued to advance in silence. In front of a large door, the head of the family activated the access panel with his hand. A gigantic room covered by a dense fog revealed itself before them. From within the fog, dialogue, the voices of the elders arose, questioning Luca's presence in the place. With his hand on Luca's shoulder, Himeles formally introduced him as Lucas. Before the thrones, the elders observed Luca and made comments about his capacity for survival. Soon, a voice from one of the thrones invited Luca to come closer. Luca then advanced alone through the fog. With a hand gesture, the elder insisted Luca advance even further. The pressure of the moment became visible on Luca's face. Finally, Luca stopped a few steps from one of the thrones. In a swift movement, the elder's hand reached out and touched Luca's face. The elder then wished Luca a long life, advising him to swallow the chaos rather than be carried away by it. Soon after, the elder commented on the invisible things now surrounding Luca. With a hand still on his face, Luca simply replied that he understood. Then, Luca turned and walked away from the throne. One of the elders then changed the subject to succession, while another suggested that the visitor should leave first. Himeles remained silent beside Luca. Shortly after, the commander stated that it was fine for Luca to stay there. The unexpected display of trust made Luca look at Himeles. With that, one of the elders yielded to Himeles' wish and agreed to continue. At the end of the meeting, the two left the Silver Palace under the night sky. As they walked, Luca remained silent for a moment. Soon after, Luca broke the silence to ask Himeles why he had allowed him to stay. Then, Himeles turned and said Luca would find the answer on his own. Thus, the last day in his new family's house was finally approaching. Preparing to leave, Luca opened his bedroom door for the last time. His departure, however, was immediately interrupted by an unexpected figure. A boy pointed a gun directly at Luca, asking if it was true that Luca could dodge bullets. Emilio, Himeles' son, stared at Luca with no sense of danger. With that, Luca warned Emilio to put the gun away, but Emilio only mocked the threat while provoking Luca about his origin. The provocation caused no visible reaction from Luca. In an instant, Emilio pulled the trigger while Luca moved to the side. The bullet hit the wall just behind Luca, leaving only a trail of smoke in the air. Surprised, Emilio then shouted that Luca shouldn't have dodged the bullet. Before Emilio could react, Luca lunged forward and grabbed the gun. Luca then simply kicked Emilio down the stairs. Down below, Emilio cried desperately over what had happened. As Luca walked away, he told Emilio to go tell everything to his father. With the gun in hand, Luca completed the phrase, suggesting Emilio say that his uncle tried to kill him. At that exact moment, Nicholas appeared running down the hallway, calling Emilio's name. Upon seeing his father, Emilio began crying and calling for him. From the top of the stairs, Luca silently watched the scene. The maids in the house also watched from a distance without interfering. With his son in his arms, Nicholas looked up and called Luca's name. He then demanded an immediate explanation about what had happened. In front of everyone, Luca explained that he needed to discipline Emilio for pointing a gun at an adult. Luca then added that he hoped Emilio would not repeat that behavior. At that moment, Nicholas turned to his son, asking if it was true that he had done that. Understanding the situation, Nicholas showed frustration with Emilio's behavior, but quickly regained composure. Still, Luca interrupted Nicholas, asking if he would do nothing since someone could have died. Nicholas then suggested they talk alone for a moment. Both men proceeded to a private room to continue the conversation. Once inside, Luca simply waited in silence. As soon as Nicholas sat down, he began the dialogue by calling Luca by name. Nicholas then commented that others might think they were fighting. Despite this, Nicholas was accused of using his own son to deflect suspicions of an alliance, and he lamented the risks involved. Unshaken, Luca coldly replied that he could simply have another son later. With a careless gesture, Luca suggested ignoring what he called a small problem. Nicholas then revealed that he was already aware of the alliance with Giselle. Luca warned Nicholas that if he continued by Giselle's side, Jupe could become the successor. Nicholas went on to explain that his life would be at risk if Jupe took power. Sitting in front of Nicholas, Luca simply listened attentively. Nicholas then revealed that despite appearances, Jupe had considerable support and saw Luca as a stumbling block. Nicholas lamented that neither he nor Jupe possessed Himela's power. At that moment, Luca questioned why Nicholas felt pressured by someone without ability, but the answer did not come easily. It was then mentioned that Jupe's military background guaranteed him support from part of the family. It was further added that some also preferred a weak leader rather than someone with Himela's power. The revelation made Luca understand that Himela's strength was the reason certain members sought a weaker successor. Luca then recalled the meeting with the elders, reflecting on the true role of a leader. In light of that, Luca asked what Nicholas wanted from him. The answer was that Nicholas needed an opponent to increase his popularity. In an instant, Luca understood that the whole plan, including the risk to Emilio, had been orchestrated for that moment. Luca then remembered Giselle's warning that Nicholas was the one who most resembled Himela. Getting up, Nicholas expressed that he hoped to have been understood, but Luca surprised him with a question. Luca wanted to know what would happen if he became strong enough to surpass the successor position. Without turning around, Nicholas simply replied that even in that case, Luca would still need an ally to maintain power. With a sharp smile, Luca responded that his question was not ironic. Nicholas then turned and reflected that, in the past, he believed nobles led a life without problems. As Nicholas walked away, Luca offered to help, reminding him that his position within the house was also the lowest. Finally, it was suggested that, to keep the promise made, Luca could tell everything about the conversation to Giselle. From the door, Nicholas shouted that Luca could keep thinking he was special, but it would be difficult to be recognized as a Custoria that way. Luca remained silent in the empty room. The previous conversation made Luca reflect on his own problems as he continued his journey. Soon, the scene shifted to show Luca and Himela traveling together. Dressed in his uniform, Luca was intently examining a card bearing a family symbol. Beside him, Commander Himela interacted with a holographic data panel. Himela, the veteran, then asked Luca if he had any interest in the family. Luca simply replied that it was nothing special, the lack of rest in recent days clearly apparent on his face. Luca then recalled his efforts to exceed expectations during his stay at the family house. These memories contrasted Himela's image as a family man with the stern commander Luca knew. As Luca held the family card, his train of thought was suddenly interrupted. A strange, glitchy figure flickered onto a panel, signaling system interference. Moments later, the entire vehicle began to shake violently. A powerful impact then struck the transport, throwing it sharply off course. Suddenly, Luca realized the vehicle was being diverted in another direction. Himela, however, remained perfectly calm, simply telling Luca not to worry. The elder then revealed they had already planned for a possible attack, and that traitors awaited them at the end of their route. Himela indicated that support would arrive in 10 minutes, and they just needed to hold on until then. Luca then grabbed a weapon, preparing for the confrontation. However, Himela corrected him, stating they would leave the vehicle to avoid becoming an easy target. The suggestion surprised Luca for a moment. He quickly understood that, in Himela's position, knowing how to pilot was an expected skill. Without hesitation, the commander moved to the controls and opened an emergency exit. Next, Himela reassured Luca, explaining that the car would absorb the impact of the fall. As the transport plummeted toward the ground, Himela called out to Luca with a question. Mid-fall, Himela asked Luca what he thought of their situation. Luca shouted that Himela was using himself as bait. Himela then confirmed the plan, explaining it was so Barbara could gain the Nemesis's trust. Moments later, the commander warned Luca to prepare for impact, and Luca simply shouted Barbara's name. The vehicle collided with the ground in a huge explosion. Amid the wreckage, fire and smoke billowed into the air. Suddenly, the compartment door was violently thrown far away. Soon after, Luca emerged from the debris, confirming his survival. Looking at the desolate area, Luca wondered if they could hold out for 10 minutes with nowhere to hide. With his hand on Luca's shoulder, Himela stated that the enemy had seen the car fall and would arrive soon. Luca's gaze turned to the horizon, where he saw Himela also watching. At that moment, Luca's eye glowed, a clear sign he was ready. Far away, a space station orbited the planet in silence. From their vantage point, they could see enemies approaching faster and faster. Grabbing his weapon, Himela, the veteran, declared the weather was perfect, then stood up, ready to use it. Charging his power, Himela commented that he was finally using it, and after a full charge, he fired a powerful shot, sweeping everything in front of him. Seeing the overwhelming magnitude of the attack, Luca concluded it wouldn't be necessary to prepare for anything further. Himela had made himself bait, knowing he could handle it alone, and told Luca to pay attention, as there was a chance to see him truly fighting. Facing the destruction, Himela commented that more enemies had survived than he expected. Himela informed Luca that his weapon system would identify all targets in 21 seconds. He then fired another shot, devastating the area even more. Luca, the young man, repositioned and questioned how it was possible, as the enemies were not even in their field of vision. Luca then asked if the commander was using satellite coordinates for the attacks, and his suspicion was confirmed. Himela explained that as leader of the Centurion, he has access to a military satellite for personal use. He continued, detailing that operating such equipment requires multiple computer systems. It became clear that the veteran, Himela, was controlling everything alone. demonstrating the true power of a centurion leader. Suddenly, Himmela dodged a shot coming his way. Both he and Luca observed that their enemies were rapidly approaching. Shortly after, a horde of opponents appeared through the dust, and one of them shouted upon locating them. A mechanized soldier yelled orders to focus the attack on the commander, Himmela, and leave no trace of him. Simultaneously, a fighter with a sniper rifle prepared to attack. The sniper then fired toward Himmela, who calmly commented that he would take care of them. Soon after, Himmela told Luca to simply try to survive, but the young man complained that the order was too vague. Himmela then advised him, saying that to rise in life, Luca would need to learn how to understand orders like that. Himmela's voice echoed, warning that the world would not make things easy for the young man. While shooting non-stop, Luca wondered how this was possible. However, one of the hooded enemies easily deflected Luca's bullets with his sword. The opponent's skill immediately caught Himmela's attention. The fighter then advanced at high speed, ready to attack. With a smile, Himmela, the more experienced one, spun his body and prepared a counterattack. Himmela moved quickly across the battlefield, then jumped onto the horde of adversaries waiting for him. With a single whirlwind strike, he hit all the surrounding enemies at once. The commander then smiled with satisfaction. Luca watched the display of power with his bionic eye activated. He remembered he should pay attention, but the task proved difficult as he also needed to defend himself. Thus, Luca understood that Himmela was not there to help or protect him. The moment an enemy attacked him, Luca recalled the warning that the world would not make things easy for anyone. His mechanical eye activated an aiming system, analyzing targets in a digital environment. Suddenly, Luca's shot hit one of the traitors in the head. Without time to lose, Luca fought for survival. Soon, one of the opponents fired in his direction. As Luca fought seriously, he observed that his opponent, much like himself, managed to dodge the shot. This made Luca wonder if the traitors could also utilize such techniques. Luca continued, stating that fighting without a suitable body is the power of Arcee's victima, but that there is still a difference. Launching into a counterattack, Luca was determined that he must at least try, so he grabbed the enemy's arm, leaving the opponent confused. Luca then delivered a blow that quickly finished off the enemy. Luca concluded that his move was unexpected, but a more skilled opponent would have cut off his arm. After the confrontation, Luca paused for a moment to process the situation. From atop a pile of bodies, Luca saw Himmela finishing off the last enemy with his spear. As they approached, Himmela turned to Luca and asked if it was already over. Himmela then commented directly that Rick was waiting to get injured in battle just to finish him off. Given that, Luca asked why they hadn't set up an ambush for Rick. The veteran then revealed that capturing Rick wouldn't destroy their nemesis, would put Barbara at risk, and would ultimately waste their efforts. Himmela then added that he was just a replaceable piece, an idea that shocked Luca, who couldn't fathom a leader being dispensable. As they walked away, Luca asked if anyone was truly irreplaceable. Himmela raised a finger, pointing to a large structure in the distance. He confirmed that exactly one person held such importance, while Luca stared at the immense building. The commander then stated that Luca knew that person very well. Luca fell silent, absorbing the new and heavy information. He then began to understand that as long as it was to protect that person, it didn't matter if others, like himself or even Himmela, died. This realization made him question his own usefulness. Even so, as they walked toward the structure surrounded by ships, Luca reaffirmed to himself that he still belonged to the Empire. As Luca entered the main hall under the Empire's banner, all eyes turned to him. He walked through the hall with a serious expression, keenly aware of the attention he was receiving. An identification card he carried confirmed his new family affiliation. Two young men soon began whispering, questioning how he had acquired the surname Castoria. Another group then commented that even with the captain's affection, the adoption seemed excessive. For others, it was a miracle, but for Luca, the situation was deeply uncomfortable. Soon after, Giselle passed by him, dropping an object on the floor with an apology. Luca then stepped on the item, remembering that he had joined Himmela to no longer be disposable. Still, upon seeing the card on the floor, he realized his goal seemed impossible. Alone in the crowd, he understood he would have to pay a price, risking his life to discover Quinuan's identity. Therefore, he decided to do everything he could until that day arrived. Thus, he started a combat simulation where multiple targets with alerts appeared around him. Amid intense training, he defended against all attacks with his sword. His routine consisted of non-stop training, connected to machines that monitored his body. At the end of each cycle, robotic arms performed procedures while he rested. Mechanical arms continued the procedures, applying improvements to his body while a monitor displayed his vital signs. After the process, he got up and analyzed the constant physical improvements he had been receiving. Next to him, a container full of used components revealed that less than a year remained until his training concluded. With that in mind, he decided he needed to go to the lower sector soon. His ultimate goal remained clear: to become an Imperial guard, just as he had always dreamed. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Ailey, who arrived in front of a large, imposing Imperial building. Back at the facilities, Luca walked down a corridor leading to the restroom. Upon entering, Luca heard two cadets commenting that despite his smile, Ailey's ambition never seemed normal. Luca approached and asked what had happened, discovering that Ailey had become the heir after defeating his own brother. One of the cadets added that Ailey had probably come for a psychological test, confirming his long-awaited return. A plaque on the wall then showed that Ailey Kartika's status had been absent until that moment. Alone on the staircase, Luca reflected on the fact that Ailey had faced his brother for the title, even though Ailey never showed interest. With a serious look, Luca realized Ailey probably hadn't yet overcome the recent events. Luca then remembered Lillian Ramona's death and how Ailey, despite giving his all, had ended up losing her. The image of a gun firing appeared in Luca's mind. He remained sitting on the stairs, recalling that her death had been by Aile's own hands. The silence of the place was broken by a voice calling Luca. It was Aile himself, watching Luca from above with a smile. Ailey approached, commenting he was moved, and asked if he should call him Lucas. Luca corrected him, saying it was just Luca. Ailey then said he would put away his backpack and asked for a moment, and Luca agreed. Luca watched his friend walk away with a slight smile. Once settled, Luca commented that he had heard Ailey fought his brother and took his place. Ailey corrected him, explaining it was a formal duel, and that he won because his brother was weak to provocations. This led Luca to ask what Ailey did. With a smile, Ailey revealed he had seduced the girl his rival liked, commenting it was easy since he was handsome. After saying he even felt sorry for his brother, Luca simply replied, "He is trashed." Ailey then changed the subject, questioning how Luca was accepted so easily by the Castoria family. In response, Luca stated that his life had always been like walking a tightrope, and the current situation was no different. Ailey then offered a piece of advice. Even a juggler falls sometimes, but that doesn't mean the show should stop. Soon after, Ailey stood and called Luca's name to get his attention. Firmly, Luca declared that he no longer wanted to run from his problems. Immediately, Ailey asked if this decision was because of that girl. Luca then explained his logic, stating that to solve his family's and the Empire's problems, he just needed to reach a position of power. Luca remained silent for a moment, convinced of his decision. Watching Luca, Ailey recognized his friend's incredible abilities, and concluded that if Luca had already made a decision, there was nothing to be done. Luca then changed the subject, welcoming Ailey and warning that Ailey would also need to work harder. The two remained there, each with their own burdens and ambitions. Next, Ailey extended his hand and proposed they work hard together once again, because that was their purpose. With a firm handshake, Luca agreed to the plan and confirmed his participation. As Luca was helped to stand, it became clear that his only task now was not to fall off the tightrope, since Ailey had already proven his worth. Soon after, Luca descended by a panoramic elevator, observing the immense nighttime city below. Luca then walked down a dark street, passing guards and heading to a lower sector of the metropolis. Upon arrival, he approached and saw two injured men sitting in a dark alley. Suddenly, a holographic screen opened, trying to initiate a call with Gabriel. One of the wounded quietly got up while Luca kept his gaze fixed forward. Suddenly, the attacker's mechanical hand quickly reached toward Luca's waist. With a violent tug, Luca ripped the opponent's arm off, who screamed in pain. The man then fled, stumbling down the alley, and Luca just watched him walk away. With a smirk, Luca commented that he was finally starting to feel at home. He then looked at the communicator's screen, wondering why Gabriel hadn't answered the missed call. Luca then entered a room, pausing at the door for a moment before proceeding, his gaze fixed on something on the floor of the dark room. As soon as Luca saw Gabriel's body on the floor, he concluded the call hadn't been answered because the man was dead. However, with difficulty, Gabriel opened his eyes and said he wasn't dead yet. As soon as the elevator opened, Luca stepped into an industrial corridor. Meanwhile, Luca's expression remained focused as he approached his destination. Shortly after, Luca tested a new weapon attached to his mechanical arm. The blacksmith then turned to Luca and showed him the prosthesis he had made, asking what Luca thought. Next, Luca picked up the new sword, commenting that the grip was firm and aligned well with the prosthesis, but the strength could be adjusted. Even without a detailed request, the craftsman delivered a weapon that seemed exactly what Luca needed for combat. Luca then introduced the blade, explaining its name was Cruxus, which meant calamity in the ancient tongue. He also revealed that the pistol was called Ruina, meaning destruction. After explaining that feminine names required special treatment, Luca, the wielder of the weapons, promised to make good use of them. The blacksmith said goodbye enthusiastically as Luca left the place with his new arsenal. Now alone, Luca held the weapon, keenly aware he would need something beyond his current skills to fight someone stronger. After all, Luca's old equipment hadn't helped last time and had been completely destroyed. Shortly after, Luca found Gabriel lying on a medical bed, badly injured and covered in bandages. Standing by the bedside, Luca quietly observed his contact's condition. Gabriel revealed he had taken 2 shots, one in the chest and another in the stomach, which meant they hadn't tried to kill him. When Luca asked what happened, Gabriel explained the attack was a warning, as everyone in the area was increasing their forces. He added that they shot him as a message, leading Luca to ask why Gabriel didn't just join a gang to survive. Gabriel retorted that he preferred to die rather than be a lackey, then changed the subject, asking what Luca was doing there after so long. Sitting in a chair, Luca answered vaguely that he needed to take care of something. As he stood to leave, Luca said he would come back the next day and told Gabriel to take his medicine to get stronger, despite the protests. Gabriel still tried to get Luca's attention as Luca walked away from the bed. Outside, the city lights and its massive holograms filled the urban landscape. Among the crowd, Luca, the Wanderer, watched the information panels floating everywhere. With guards posted all around the hospital, Luca concluded Gabriel would be safe for now. With his contact secure, Luca's attention turned to the next clue. The information received from Quinuan indicated the target was close to the former coliseum manager. To do that, Luca needed to find out what the former coliseum manager had done back then, believing he would find the clue he was looking for there. Still, there was the question of what the manager would be doing in a place like that. From a vantage point, Luca looked at the urban landscape, a place of stark contrast. Then, Luca climbed the stairs of a place that seemed to no longer hold any dreams. Standing under the lights, he tried to decipher why his target had come there. As Luca walked, holograms of giant fish floated silently through the alley. Suddenly, a memory made Luca stop abruptly. The image took him to the edge of an old building. It was then that Luca understood that, out of habit, he had ended up returning to the place where he was raised. With this new clarity, Luca hurried down another deserted street. Turning the corner, he spotted 2 men talking near a vehicle. Hidden, Luca heard one of them complain about yet another trick played by the director. The conversation led Luca to a window, where several children looked out. The older ones seemed to know what the director was doing, but couldn't act because they were weak. Faced with that scene, Luca understood that the world would not change by itself. Even if Luca did something, he knew relief for those children would be only temporary. After all, their situation would only improve for a few months before everything went back to how it was before. With that, the 2 men noticed Luca's presence and asked what he was doing there. While one of them told Luca to get lost, Luca concluded that he had become too sentimental. Still, that was enough reason to decide to get involved in the situation. The orphanage director recognized Luca and, surprised, told his companion to back off. While taking a punch, Luca tried to say that the young man had truly become a guard. After easily knocking the guard down, Luca simply commented that he already had enough money. The director, desperate, tried to argue, reminding Luca that he had always been good to him, even giving him extra food. Grabbing the director by the collar, Luca replied that was precisely why he hadn't broken his neck yet. Completely terrified, the director started crying and begging for forgiveness, pleading to know what he had done wrong. Luca only explained that he was passing through, and what he saw annoyed him, ignoring the director's apologies and promises that it wouldn't happen again. Despite the director's promises to become a new man thanks to him, Luca just watched him silently. With the image of children smiling at the window in his mind, the decision was made. Without hesitation, Luca struck the director's face with a powerful punch. With the director on the ground, Luca adjusted his hood and warned him to feed the children properly the next day. Soon after, Luca turned and walked away down the dark alley. Later, upon meeting Gabriel, Luca heard him loudly complaining about the pain he felt. Still protesting, Gabriel reminded Luca that he had taken 2 shots, while Luca told him to be quiet and stop with the drama. In a moment of reflection, Luca admitted that only a good night's sleep had prevented him from breaking the director's legs. He also concluded that hitting someone he hated was good for his mental health, wondering if that was what Himalis meant. Moments later, the 2 arrived in front of a large building identified as the Coliseum. At the entrance, a security guard approached them, asking Gabriel about the shots and noticing he had no fight scheduled. Gabriel explained they needed to speak with Aleph, and that the matter was with his companion Luca, not with him. Soon after, the security guard recognized Luca as the good boy, the fighter who wiped out his race, telling him to calm down. Ignoring the comment, the guard used his communicator to inform that Gabriel was there with the good boy to see Aleph. Then, he guided them up a staircase to the upper floor. In the room, Aleph welcomed them and, already aware of the rumors, asked Gabriel if he was okay after taking the shots. Luca commented on his friend's popularity, to which Gabriel retorted, asking how Luca thought he had survived so long. Soon after, Aleph greeted Luca as good boy, but Luca corrected him, asking to be called by his real name and inquired about his teacher. Upon hearing Aleph offer a match, Luca declined, explaining that the business was with Aleph and that he wanted to talk in private. However, Aleph refused the request, stating he wasn't good at fighting and that his men were there for his security. With that, the ex-fighter Luca boasted that the men who followed them were nothing but ants to him. The Coliseum's head, Aleph, then warned Luca not to be arrogant just because he knew how to fight, saying he was crossing the line. In response, Luca just smiled and told Aleph to obey. Aleph broke his cigarette and called Luca good boy again. Luca just reminded Aleph that he had already told him to call him Luca. Then, the guards from the coast rushed at them. Quickly, Luca turned to Gabriel and ordered him to close the door. The guards then fired, forcing Gabriel to block the shots with his body. While dodging the gunfire, Luca hung from the ceiling, hoping they would stop shooting. From the door, Gabriel shouted for Luca to hurry up and finish it quickly. After landing, the enemies aimed their weapons at Luca, and one of them ended up hitting his own ally. Soon after, Luca crossed his arms and finished off the two henchmen. Sitting in his armchair, Aleph admitted that his security really had been useless. Later, the rain began to fall over the streets and the city's holograms. Water ran down the facade of an industrial building. Inside, Gabriel complained about the pain in his body because of the rain, while being treated by Gilda. Gilda teased Luca, asking if he knew his body wasn't waterproof, but he just replied sarcastically. While looking at the rain through the window, Luca concluded that the deal with Aleph hadn't been so bad. After all, his surname proved more useful than he expected in the negotiation. The Coliseum's head recognized Luca as Lucas Castoria, son of the Imperial Guard captain. With that, the head decided the risk was worth it and asked what Luca needed. Luca's request was to obtain information about the man who killed the former Coliseum leader, a common occurrence in the streets. Luca made it clear that he wanted to know every detail, no matter how small. Back in the present, Luca recounted that Aleph had offered to become his servant after their conversation. Luca explained that upon reaching adulthood in a year, he would have the right to a servant, but before that, Aleph would need to prove his worth. While analyzing the report, Luca interrupted the conversation, noting it would give him clues about Quinuan. Then Gabriel asked why he would have to pay for an upgrade, if his limbs were already waterproof models. The technician explained that the substance wore out over time, especially in the Akbiran rain, and needed to be updated every 6 months. Gabriel complained about the cost, stating he had never needed such maintenance before. While Gilda warned him about the deterioration of the parts, Gabriel commented that aging was normal. However, Gilda asked them to stop pretending. Without arguing, Luca left a chip on the table for Gilda to make the necessary updates, including those for Gabriel's body. With the chip in hand, Gilda thanked Luca, saying he always saved them. Gabriel tried to warn Luca about Gilda, but Luca told him to shut up, stating Gabriel knew nothing. Gilda then turned around and asked Luca if the homemade cookies were good, assuring him they wouldn't cause any problems. Luca just took a sip of his drink in silence. Sitting at the table, Luca analyzed the report, concluding that Aleph had taken control of the arena cleanly after the previous leadership disappeared. Since there were still survivors, Luca decided it would be worth trying to contact them. On the screen, the file of one of the remnants, Ken Noma, appeared, stating he was hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital. Suddenly, an explosion outside shattered the calm. Shortly after, an armored vehicle descended a makeshift ramp amid the rain. Inside the car, Luca was behind the wheel as the vehicle landed abruptly. Luca then questioned the need for such a grand entrance, since their target was in a hospital. Next to Luca, Gabriel complained that he hadn't healed yet and asked if Luca was hiding something. Luca denied it. The memory of the man who attacked them came to Luca's mind. He was dressed like a gangster. Gabriel wondered if the shooter was connected to the gang that injured him, but admitted he had no idea how Luca saw the scene. After concluding that Gabriel was hiding nothing, Luca realized the real problem was that no one should know they were on their way. His expression changed as he noticed something. Drawing Gabriel's attention, from atop a building, one of the shooters accused Luca of messing with Aleph and ignoring their warnings. From inside the car, Gabriel shouted back, denying any alliance with the Coliseum boss. The shooter retorted, saying they knew Luca went to make a deal right after being shot. With confirmation of the attack, it became clear the real target was Gabriel, and Luca knew they needed to find out why. Then Luca asked Gabriel for a weapon, explaining that his own was not suitable for use against civilians. As Luca grabbed the weapon attached to Gabriel's arm, he heard Gabriel complain that Luca shouldn't carry something so powerful. Through the communicator, the enemy taunted, saying Gabriel made the wrong choice and that their sister just wanted to say hi. With a With a new weapon in hand, Luca aimed while calculating the shot, focusing on a point in the upper corner. His aiming system locked onto the target as he prepared to shoot. At that same moment, another shooter fired a heavy projectile in Luca's direction. With a precise shot, Luca's bullet intercepted the projectile mid-air, causing an explosion. The main shooter was hit in the hand and screamed, not understanding what had happened. Gabriel quickly started shooting multiple times at the henchmen, causing them to flee. Watching the scene, Gabriel repeated the word sister, beginning to piece together the situation. Inside the car, the hospital security guard spoke up, informing them that reinforcements would arrive in 3 minutes. Luca then pointed out that the 3 minutes had already passed and suggested the man change his security detail, receiving thanks in return. With that, Gabriel approached and grabbed one of the fallen shooters by the collar. He asked if the sister was Martina, from the gang La Vue en Rose, who was hunting him for refusing to join the group. The captured man then revealed the true reason for the attack, shouting that the sister actually liked him. Next, he explained that Martina got furious because Gabriel refused her offer. After Gabriel was shot, she went running to find Aleph. The man continued, saying Martina used the excuse of joining the gang just to get closer to her target. Luca then interrupted the conversation and told the captured man to let Martina know that Gabriel would see her soon, despite Gabriel's protest. Still, Gabriel concluded it was better to resolve the situation, wondering if Martina's interest could be useful since she was a gang leader. The possibility of using the scenario to his advantage sparked his interest. Shortly after, the vehicle arrived in front of the psychiatric hospital. Finally, they stopped in front of the room where Ken Noma was sitting with his back to the glass door. Soon after, the two entered the room. Luca then observed the patient, who was calm in his room. As Luca approached, he called Ken Noma by name, confirming his identity. Upon finding Ken Noma, Luca introduced himself and said he had a question about the arena manager. Even without getting a response, Luca closely observed the man's catatonic condition. Soon, Gabriel explained it would be useless, since Ken had been tortured to the limit and was now like a living corpse. With that, Luca prepared a temporary treatment used by the guards for damaged nerves, planning to use it on Ken. Next, Luca stated that his information showed Ken was fanatical about knives. Gabriel then asked them to leave, treating the situation as a waste of time, while Ken Noma handled the blade. Ignoring the warning, Luca advanced, aiming a quick jab at Ken Noma. However, the attack was blocked at the last moment by Ken's weapon. With the impact, Ken Noma's eyes showed a sudden clarity. Next, a rapid exchange of blows began between the two, releasing sparks with each movement. Quickly, Luca managed to stop the knife's advance by holding it with only 2 fingers. With his arm immobilized, Ken finally spoke, saying he felt like he was trapped in a swamp and confirmed his name. Soon after, Ken deduced that Luca had some questions to ask him. Faced with Gabriel's surprise, Luca explained that he now only needed to keep Ken Noma's brain active. Maintaining the tension of the fight, Luca demanded to know about Tora's friends, but Ken Noma challenged him to provide a good reason to talk. In response, Luca simply promised that he could get Ken Noma out of that place. The offer of freedom immediately sparked Ken Noma's interest. Next, Luca turned to Gabriel, his partner, and asked to shelter Ken Noma for a few days, explaining that he needed to gather trustworthy people. The proposal became even bolder when Luca suggested creating a gang, with Gabriel as the leader. Faced with Gabriel's refusal, Luca pressured him with the option of replacing him, which made Gabriel hesitate immediately. The need to have eyes and ears in the lower sectors, something only his partner could not provide, justified the creation of the gang. With the deal sealed, Luca returned the knife to his new ally, Ken Noma. Accepting the proposal, Ken Noma warned he had little time and prepared to tell the story Luca needed to hear. As the scene shifted to a moving vehicle, a new understanding of the facts arose for Luca. Luca learned that Tora had a longtime friend who secretly helped him, operating outside of any gang. The truth was now clear. Just as Luca used Gabriel, Quinuan had formed his own secret organization, using Tora as a front. Quinuan's method involved recruiting trusted allies to carry out unofficial missions behind the scenes. This realization made Luca wonder if, by following the professor's tracks, he wasn't replicating the same actions. Standing before an imposing building, Luca concluded that although he now had a new lead, the entire situation remained insufficient and overly complicated. The mission led Luca to a vast databank room filled with servers. Soon after, he approached a terminal and began his research on a floating screen. The search confirmed Luca's suspicion. Tora's downfall coincided with the date Quinuan became a professor. Despite this discovery, Quinuan's goals remained a mystery, and Luca decided he needed to help Ken Noma recover. He then considered the risk that Gabriel might also fall if the gang grew too large, a fate similar to Tora's. Luca gained a new perspective, understanding that Quinuan had done nothing wrong, as it was thanks to him that Tora succeeded. Quinuan's method, Luca's old master, became clear. He balanced balanced interests by keeping a safe distance to lead any relationship. This strategy ensured there would be no hesitation in making sacrifices, including even the strongest and most precious allies. The entire tactic aimed not to lose direction amid chaos, and above all, to survive. Suddenly, Luca directly questioned what he truly wanted. Quinuan, now present, offered Luca his congratulations. He then stated that all he wanted was for Luca to finally understand the fundamentals of Arcee's victima. Next, Quinuan declared that Luca's next step was to continue the plan and become someone like him. At the training center, Quinuan observed Luca from a distance while drinking from a flask. Shortly after, Quinuan commented on the surprising ease with which Luca reached the Mista level. Not understanding the term, Luca heard the explanation. A Mista is someone who can teach victima arts, and users were once divided by hierarchies. Despite the information, Quinuan, with a suspicious look, dismissed the subject, stating that this practice had been practically extinct. Luca said he didn't believe he was called there just for that. He then warned Quinuan to hold back and not provoke him, reminding his mentor of his own well-known bad mood. Quinuan stated that, as always, it was easier to learn in practice than through words. As Quinuan stood up, Luca concluded that even though his mentor was a master in Arcee's victima, he still had physical limitations. Luca then added that the veteran would not be able to defeat him with that body. Suddenly, energy concentrated in Quinuan's hand. Quinuan warned Luca to protect his head and torso, while Luca noticed a subtle change in his adversary. Luca realized that Quinuan had only switched his right arm, and admired the control that prevented him from noticing the difference in weight and sensation. Even knowing the risk of using a high-power cybernetic piece with damaged nerves, a cruel smile crossed Luca's face. While observing his own cybernetic arm, Luca understood that he might never have a chance like this again. In a combat stance, Luca thanked his master, treating Quinuan as his teacher. The vast space between them marked the start of the confrontation. Shortly after, Luca fell to the ground, admitting to himself that he was defeated. Even with a great advantage in the fight, Luca didn't understand how Quinuan managed to stop his attacks with that arm. As Luca recovered, he questioned whether Quinuan could see the future, but Quinuan denied having that ability. Quinuan then explained that Arcee's victima techniques were learned by stealing them, and that Luca needed to use his brain's resources. With that, Quinuan ended the lesson, saying they would continue in the next class, and dismissing Luca. The image of Ken Noma flashed in Luca's mind, reminding him of his mission. As Luca stood up, he concluded that to take the next step, he would have to learn some things alone, a difficult path he knew. Despite being dismissed, Luca offered to support his teacher. As Luca supported him, Quinuan remarked that he would owe him one, and Luca simply accepted. Luca then reflected that the person who knew everything was right beside him. The drink left on the bench reinforced the unspoken rule they both followed, maintaining a certain psychological distance. During their journey to the office, Quinuan suggested Luca try a relationship before changing his body. Luca simply replied that he would see what to do. This brief conversation made Luca admit to himself that it would be a lie to say their relationship didn't hurt him. The reason was the certainty that, one day, they would inevitably have to part ways. At least one last wish remained in Luca's mind, not having to deal with Quinuan with his own hands. Hidden cybernetic mercenaries laughed around a table. As Luca approached, his companion warned him that those men would do anything for money. Because of that, Luca grabbed his companion by the collar and complained that he needed useful people, not that kind of crowd. Gabriel then explained that Ken Noma was in a room on the second floor, though it had been costly to get him out of the hospital. Soon after, Luca delivered the chip, asking them to save it, and the others simply agreed. As Luca walked away, the sponsor instructed Gabriel to tell the men that he was behind the operation and that they should take the job seriously. Meanwhile, in the second floor room, Ken Noma sat on the bed. As Luca entered, he heard Gabriel saying that Ken's name should still be on the hospital's list. Gabriel continued, explaining that visitors wouldn't discover anything, except for guards and nurses. After hearing the information, a slight smile appeared on Luca's face. He then grabbed a vial and inserted it into an injection device. Approaching Ken, Luca held the injector in hand. Suddenly, a knife flew toward Ken Noma. The question was asked directly, "Do you know who I am, Ken Noma?" With the blade in hand, Ken confirmed he recognized him. Ken then stared at Luca, stating that he was someone trustworthy. Now, with the knife in his possession, Luca invited Ken for a conversation. Meanwhile, Gabriel was suddenly surprised by the fierce exchange between the two. Without hesitation, Ken Noma, the man on the bed, attacked fiercely. However, with an agile movement, Luca managed to block, realizing his opponent must have been very good back in the day. Luca then forced Ken a step backward. With the impact, Ken Noma staggered back to the bed. Even without understanding, Ken asked what had been done, as his mind felt clearer. Luca simply replied that he had mixed and applied some medicines. Ken then questioned Luca about his knowledge. Luca then revealed he was following the trail of the man who sponsored Tora. But before Luca could say more, Ken asked for a cigarette and alcohol. After receiving what he asked for, Ken advised Luca to relax, commenting that he looked like a soldier. With that, Ken finally remembered that Tora called him Noel. Ken continued, explaining that Tora wouldn't have handled something as big as the arena alone. It must have been because of that man. Curious, Luca asked what happened, and Ken responded that part of the arena's money was being diverted. Before continuing, Ken said he wanted to ask one thing. Luca immediately deduced the request was about Aleph. Ken then confirmed, revealing he still wanted to take revenge for the state he was left in. However, the visitor refuses, explaining that he and Aleph are business partners and that the matter should be ignored. The visitor then reminds Ken that he is under Gabriel's gang protection and will be able to take revenge when he gets out of there. Even so, Ken interrupts, guaranteeing that he keeps his word, unlike the visitor. Luca just listens, thinking how everyone who betrays says the same thing. His gaze then turns toward Gabriel in the background, knowing whom to trust. Suddenly, the mention of Tora's records makes Luca's eyes widen. The informant explains that Aleph must have the records and instructs Luca to look for companies starting with the letter B, as the money that went through them went to Noel. As Luca receives this information, he realizes something is happening outside. Gabriel approaches, asking what is going on. Before them, a woman steps on the head of a fallen mercenary, questioning if they thought they could defeat her. She addresses Gabriel, telling him he needs to train his subordinates better. Gabriel then asks her why she invaded the place like that. As they go down the stairs, Luca asks why she appeared. The woman justifies her presence, stating it was sudden and that she has things to resolve. The two then stare at each other silently for a moment. Soon after, Luca asks if she can just show up and cause trouble. Faced with the accusation, she admits her mistake, but asks if it wouldn't have been better to talk beforehand. Luca orders the men to take care of everything while he and Gabriel leave, forbidding them from drinking. The three then walk through the city, which is lit by holograms. As they walk, Gabriel explains that La Vie en Rose is a gang created to protect women. He continues, saying most members were born there and that the gang leader is also a woman. Curious, Luca asks if they have met, but Gabriel replies he saw her during an old security job. Gabriel then brags about her appearance to Luca, while Luca simply observes. At that moment, Luca thinks Aleph might betray him if their interests aren't aligned. Now Luca knows Gabriel is an irreplaceable piece for him. Suddenly, the woman announces they have arrived at their destination. Upon arrival, the group faces the imposing facade of the Serene Sea Pavilion. Right at the entrance, the woman calls Gabriel, prompting him to ask if she wants to fight again. Before a large door, she warns Gabriel not to refuse the lady this time. She then says only then will Gabriel be able to survive. As the door opens, Luca notices a strong red substance filling the environment. Suddenly, Luca's expression changes as he understands what is happening. With that, Luca quickly finishes off a girl, realizing they want to neutralize his senses. Luca then announces he will blow the head off whoever moves. One of the guards tries to react but is severely wounded with a shot to the head. Then, a woman holding a fan reveals herself behind the smoke, asking them to stop. The head of the place then questions who gave them permission to be arrogant with her guest. Soon after, one of the subordinates apologizes to her lady for what happened. As Gabriel gets angry about the situation, Luca intervenes and asks him to stay calm. Luca then explains they only came to talk, but understands she wants to get rid of him without dirtying her own hands. The woman then apologizes for her subordinate's loyalty and directly asks Luca's name. After introducing himself, Luca is asked what he does in the lower sectors, but he replies it is none of her business. The lady then informs Luca that he seems not to understand how things work, revealing that he is in La Vie en Rose. With that, Luca laughs while she warns him that he is very mistaken if he thinks nobility guarantees any safety in that place. The hostess, Martina, watched Luca angrily from behind her fan as he commented that some people think they are important just because they stick together in groups. Seeing her reaction, Martina's subordinate approached and asked her lady to calm down. The servant then leaned in to speak with Martina, while Luca watched from afar. With a quick movement, Martina closed her fan. Shortly after, she turned around and ordered them to follow her. As the group was led inside, Martina warned that she would get straight to the point. Sitting in her room, Martina revealed that the only thing she wanted was to date Gabriel. Surprised, Luca questioned why a woman like her would be interested in him, since a pretty face could get her anything. Gabriel muttered that he hated being under someone's wing, but Luca corrected him, explaining that he was just a sponsor, not Gabriel's boss. Gabriel then emphasized that Luca was not his boss, provoking a reaction from Martina. Luca suggested that Gabriel date her for a while, as it wouldn't be a problem to balance that with work. Not understanding Gabriel's refusal, Luca asked what the problem was. Gabriel revealed that the real issue was Martina being much older than him. At that moment, Luca realized Martina was even older than Gabriel's grandmother. Gabriel stammered that he would rather die than accept it, even admitting she was still physically very well. Faced with the impasse, Luca simply put his hand on his head. Next, Luca revealed that Gabriel now had a gang, and therefore could no longer enter La Vie en Rose. Luca added that, thanks to his good relationship with Aleph from the arena, Gabriel's gang wouldn't have trouble establishing themselves. Still, Martina confidently stated that she had never lost a man she desired before. Luca provoked her, saying that then this would be her first time, and that it was rare to have a first time at her age. Ignoring the comment, Martina turned to Gabriel and promised she could give him things beyond imagination. Soon after, she looked at Gabriel seriously and asked him, please, to stay with her. Faced with the proposal, Gabriel just clenched his teeth and began to sweat, embarrassed. Amid the tension, everyone remained silent, waiting for the next move. Martina then sighed and declared that, given the refusal, she had no other choice. With that, Martina changed the subject and suggested they talk business, asking why they wanted a gang. She stated she didn't intend to become enemies with someone as brave as Luca, leaving Gabriel confused by the sudden change. Martina then mocked Gabriel and revealed she usually had a thing for ugly guys. Laughing cruelly, Martina called Gabriel a pathetic man and said that just thinking of him at her feet gave her chills. Seeing his partner humiliated, Luca commented that it seemed it wasn't just noble who had strange tastes. Shortly after, Martina composed herself and suggested they resume the business conversation. The scene shifted to a holographic advertisement for the local fighting arena. Elsewhere, LF commented that Luca was a smart boy for already doing business with La Vie en Rose. After the meeting with Martina, Luca went to LF to ally Gabriel's gang with the arena and La Vie en Rose. Thus, with the rumor spreading, no one would stand in Gabriel's gang's way, and talented people could join them. Luca revealed he knew LF was subordinate to Tora, and hoped LF would continue acting the same way. Back on the streets, holograms floated over pedestrians' heads. Martina's subordinate asked Luca if he really trusted the ally. Luca's answer was that she must be blind to think otherwise. Luca then commented that it was hard to trust anyone, as people are unpredictable. He remembered that Martina had offered to lend one of her girls, revealing that the ex-soldier was quite experienced, even without having finished training. Luca quickly realized that Martina, the leader, wanted to discover his identity. However, he concluded that the girl was more useful than the idiots in Gabriel's gang. Since the girl agreed to take care of security, Luca saw no loss in the deal until the young woman asked if he came from a military family. After Luca questioned why, she explained it was because he was strong and too young to have defeated her so easily. Luca comments on her confidence, but the woman clarifies that she didn't leave due to a lack of skill. She was in fact the best student in her battalion. Luca then asks why she left, but the girl refuses to answer, stating they aren't close enough to discuss personal matters. With that, he decides to drop the subject, though she insists on escorting him to the end. Before they part ways, the young woman teases him, claiming he is no stronger than she is, then bids him a formal goodbye. He simply watches as she walks away. Alone in an alley, Luca recalls Ken's instruction to look for companies starting with the letter B in Tora's books. This, he believes, will help him trace Noel, a pseudonym he suspects Quinuan used. Analyzing the data before him, Luca discovers all those companies closed years ago. He quickly realizes he needs a more reliable database, as the current system is corrupted with false information. The only solution that comes to mind is to access the Imperial data system. Even knowing the call will be expensive, he decides there is no other way and initiates it. As soon as the call connects, a voice greets him, noting he has been very busy. Nicholas then suggests they get straight to the point. Luca requests access to the Imperial database, but when denied, he proposes investigating some closed companies instead. Nicholas asks if this will help Luca's reputation in the family, and confirmation quickly follows. With that, Nicholas agrees to help and asks for the list, promising an answer in 2 hours and remarking that brothers should help each other. After hanging up, Luca feels an inevitable disdain for the brothers' false camaraderie. He decides not to dwell on the price of the favor, as his mission is his only priority at the moment. At that moment, Luca reflects on all the alliances he had to form, with Aleph, Ken Noma, Gabriel's gang, and Levi on Rose. The entire night was consumed by negotiations, leaving him dizzy. Exhausted, he throws himself onto the bed, thinking the worst thing that could happen would be a call from his new father. He buries his face in the pillow, wishing for just a few moments of peace. However, his hope is frustrated when a message notification appears, sent by Nicholas, indicating his mission is not yet over. While looking at the mission report, Luca wonders how many of these missions Ale participated in during his absence. Luca then realizes that his colleague has been volunteering for non-mandatory missions. which explains why he hasn't seen Ale. He recalls the moment Ale said that from that day on, he would stop running away. Faced with the memory, Luca decides he should go see him. Checking Ale's status, he discovers Ale is resting in his personal repair room and appears to be free, just as Luca was considering visiting. A woman approaches Luca and asks if he has already heard the news. She reveals that Ale has been going crazy with the missions and warns that he will end up losing his first place if he continues that way. Unshaken, Luca simply turns and replies with a simple, "We'll see." Immediately, the girl teases him, asking if his confidence stems from being adopted by the Castoria family. Upon hearing her suggestion that he should relax, Luca reflects that they know absolutely nothing. In a flashback, he remembers how easy it was to pull a trigger when acting under orders, without needing to judge which side one was on. Now, however, he needs to do everything alone, not knowing whom to trust and suppressing the urge to give up. Even missing the past, he reaffirms that this was his choice and that if he fails, he will be eliminated. His only goal for survival is to solve his own problems to become like figures such as Quinuan or Hylas. Seeing his reaction, the woman apologizes for judging him, admitting she was only worried because she hadn't seen him around. He reassures her, saying that this is now his power, the strength and prestige he always dreamed of. He also comments that everything starts with small steps until the nobles begin paying more attention. He then reveals that he hasn't slept for a few days. Even so, he states that being a noble is not so easy, but he will keep rising no matter what. With that, Luca walks down the corridor toward the personal repair room. Upon entering, he finds Ile lying inside a maintenance capsule. As soon as Ile notices him, the blonde greets Luca, who simply replies with Ile's name. Observing Ile's damaged hand, Luca notes it seems to have been through a lot. He then comments that he heard Lori Kartika is very active, but Ile replies that it's nothing compared to Luca. Luca recalls the warning that he could lose first place, concluding he might be weaker than Ile now. Luca reflects that Ile wasn't joking, and that it's better to start thinking about the next stage of his own fighting style. As Ile stands up, he teases Luca, asking if being his friend has advantages since Ile was sought after. Luca meets the teasing with a simply affectionate manner. Already getting dressed, Ile calls Luca to come with him, promising to show him everything he has gained so far. Inside a laboratory, a mechanical beast floats suspended in a containment tank. Upon seeing the creature, Ile asks if it's not cool, while Luca finally understands why Ile was feeling so confident. Luca recognizes the creature as an animal from the planet Novus, notoriously hard to capture, and concludes that his friend truly evolved. Luca then questions what the beast has to do with the arcane civilization, and Ile replies that although nothing is confirmed, there seems to be a connection. Soon after, Ile explains that although made of metal, these beasts have a complex structure and can reproduce and evolve on their own. Meanwhile, Ile touches the glass with a smile on his face. The focus shifts to Ile's smiling face in Luca's memory. Luca asks if it's possible to tame these things, but Ile responds that there is no correct answer due to lack of precedent. Back on the balcony, Luca asks what will happen to the mechanical beast. Ile then reveals that it may be Luca's last chance to see it, as the creature will be transported to the Royal Palace's research department. With that, Luca concludes that the beast will probably stay there. Ile just smiles sideways upon hearing the comment. Suddenly, Ile shows Luca a dagger, revealing that he also managed to acquire that. Luca identifies it as a ceremonial knife for commanders, made from the bones of an extinct animal and impossible to replicate. Luca then questions whether the weapon can be used in battle since it's made of bone, and Ile asks him to hold it firmly. In a quick move, Ile attacks, and the strike is blocked with the knife Luca holds. Holding the weapon, Luca comments that he thought it was unique. Suddenly, the dagger starts releasing energy over the blade. With a smile, Ile reveals that it is a gift to celebrate the fact that Luca might be the heir to the Castoria family. Ile then explains that the weapon's name means always white, and that it is not such a simple gift. Even without knowing if he's being teased, Luca hears Ile assure him that he's being sincere. Silently, Luca accepts the dagger offered to him. Under the city sky, Luca promises to make good use of it. Back in his room, Luca enters, holding the new gift. Finally, he observes the dagger he just received. Luca reflects that, in a universe destined to disappear, our lives are just a fragment of insignificance. Despite that, he thinks that prestige, life, and relationships are things that must continue until the end. Then, Luca admits to himself that he's getting sentimental, but that there's nothing to be done. Luca then recognizes that this is the first sincere gift he has received in his whole life. A moment later, with a smile, Luca acknowledges that Nicholas really knows how to do a good job. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye-bye.